Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Catherine Purcell, and I'm the lead for research and development for occupational therapy at Cardiff University. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the first Wales Occupational Therapy Showcase event. We have 9 fantastic presentations this morning, and I can see that at the moment we've got 65 attendees in the room, which is lovely, and I'm sure more and more are going to start joining. We started fairly promptly this morning. So, croeso. For this event, we're using the Microsoft Teams live event system, and this means that you'll notice some differences from the usual Microsoft Teams setup. So, for example, there isn't a chat box, and we can't see or hear you. You will see a vertical Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen, which will be opened after every third presentation. So please do jot down any questions as we go and post these during each of the facilitated Q&A sessions. The Q&A function is currently switched on, so please do feel free to say hello. I don't need to tell you about any fire drills, and I don't need to tell you where the facilities are. I do, however, want to reassure you that if for any reason your internet starts playing up and it kicks you out of the event, then please feel free to rejoin. Plus, of course, all cats, dogs and children are welcome. The event is being recorded, and the recording will be circulated to everyone next week, along with a very short evaluation form and a certificate of attendance. I really hope that you enjoy the morning, and thank you once again for joining us. I'll now hand over to Rachel and Cole to get us started.
Thanks, Catherine. That's great. Hi, my name is Rachel Hickey. I'm an occupational therapist in Rhondda, Cunnan Taff, and I work for Swansea Bay University Health Board. I'm from Ireland, as you can tell, so normally this week I will be living it up in a pub somewhere, but for St. Patrick's Day, but I'm sure today will be equally as fun, and I'm assured Catherine will be providing us all with Guinness. Is that right? Today I'm going to talk about my service evaluation, which looked at the use of the Model of Human Occupation tool called the Model of Human Occupation Screening Tool, or MOHOST for short. I'm based within the Adult Community Learning Disability team, so I've looked at the use of this screening tool within community learning disability teams. So just a little bit about community learning disability teams for those of you that aren't familiar. It's a really wonderful place to work. We work with adults who have learning disability, which is based on the World Health Organization definition of a learning disability, which is based on an adult's IQ level and adaptive functioning. We work with clients with autism, mental health needs and dementia, but they have a learning disability to be eligible for our service. The work is really holistic and very grounded in OT philosophy, which I love and is just fantastic. The day-to-day work can involve developing someone's skills, such as prepping snacks or meals, or assessing and recommending eating and drinking equipment. And we work with individuals who benefit from a sensory approach and use interventions such as making suggestions about environment or using a sensory story. We also look at basic aids and equipment and working with the MDT with individuals with challenging behaviour, or support families or staff to engage or support family members or clients. Historically, within our service, the assessment has been either based on the Canadian model, or some OTs have started to create their own MOHO style initial assessment. And within our health boards, learning disabilities OTs have been merged with mental health OTs, and this has really fueled a more streamlined approach to OT models of practice and assessments, and it's really fueled the question then about the use of MOHO, and specifically this tool, the Model of Human Occupation Screening tool, within our community learning disability teams. The Model of Human Occupation Screening tool is part of the set really of the Model of Human Occupation. It looks at all the MOHO concepts, and there are smaller sections then with each section. The OT rates the person across all these concepts on a scale, and then it really helps to identify strengths and needs in their key occupational areas. Some areas tend to use it as an outcome measure, so they might use it on admission or on discharge, and it's really widely used within mental health settings and is often the format for reports or is the main assessment paperwork used to summarise OT involvement. Within learning disability, it's not as widely used and there's limited research really on its use within our client group. I've always favoured qualitative research, and I really see the benefit of this way of carrying out research. I love that you can use quotes and you can get a real kind of feeling for the person and their view. And I also find that OT fits in really well with qualitative research. And in general, as people, we tend to be interested in like the smaller details and the finer kind of examples. As part of the process, I gained ethical approval for the service evaluation from the Health Board. Purpose of sampling was used for this project as we needed participants with specific experience within the community learning disability teams, and we had 4 participants in total in order to get some really in-depth rich data, but also I suppose to be kind to ourselves and make it achievable alongside full-time work demands. A timeline was created for the process, which took a bit of a hit with COVID and general life, caseload, day-to-day priorities got in the way. Last year I facilitated a student placement with Cole, and it was part-time research based, and I found this really fantastic, really positive experience because it gave me a bit of oomph and gusto back, I suppose, to complete the project, and was also really helpful to have Cole's help. She was able to bring me up to date with ideas, and she helped carry out some of the really time-consuming aspects such as transcription, and that was a huge help, and it really fuels the project. And hopefully now we're going to have Cole talk a little bit about carrying out the interviews.
Hello, good morning. So while I was working then with Rachel, I planned, arranged, conducted and transcribed the OT interviews. And so to ensure that I was gathering the appropriate and useful information, I created an interview schedule so that I could follow during this process. We used semi-structured interviews with open-ended questioning that allowed for participants then to expand and discuss their experiences freely. And while the interview schedule then helped make sure that I didn't let us stray too far off course. So in turn then, this ensured that I was able to provide Rachel with reliable and comparable qualitative data for analysis. So the interviews were conducted and recorded through Microsoft Teams. And this was so beneficial because it allowed me to work around everybody else's schedules and give everybody some more flexibility. And as services have moved further and further into remote working, I know that most OTs and definitely students are already familiar with using this medium, so it wasn't too much of a technology barrier. And Teams already has loads of tools that are inbuilt, so that collecting this sort of data is much easier, and it's really practical. So then obviously following the interviews, I downloaded them from Teams to help with the transcription process. And then once they were described, I could delete those video recordings. During the transcription process then, I actually used the transcription service called Otter. So Otter is really helpful in that you can upload the audio and it will transcribe what it hears, although it does require some checking as it often mishears words. So although it wasn't a perfect system, it did really help with speeding up the time that it takes during transcriptions. And then following member checking and making sure that the transcription itself was matching up to the video recordings, then I could delete the recordings and pass those information over to Rachel then. So hopefully Rachel will be, oh, there we are.
So as Cole said, we made sure really to make sure that we checked with the members about their participants really in their transcripts, just to check we had captured everything that reflected their opinion, and that was really useful in this type of qualitative research because it made sure that we really kept the participants' voice and we didn't lose it or we didn't get any crossed wires. Quotes also helped as well, and that was really nice to have those quotes because it just made the process really transparent, and also really you could kind of see different personalities coming through as well, which was lovely. Analysis was based on thematic analysis, which is actually more interesting than it sounds, and I really enjoyed the process. So it's where we went through the transcripts line by line, identified codes, and then we put them into themes. And then they came together to make bigger themes really across all participants' transcripts. The results were really interesting. One of the key themes was training, where the OTs said they would love more training in MOHO in general. And actually a lot of them had said, even though they were qualified donkey's years, it had been ages since they had had any training or refresher in MOHO. And a lot of them said, oh God, we haven't done that since uni. So they really felt like that would be something they'd like to look at. Experience of actually using the screening tool as well was quite interesting. Some participants couldn't remember when they'd used it, or they said, oh, I remember I'd used it once, but I can't, you know, it was ages ago. The positives as well of using the screening tool came up, and that was discussed, and participants felt they really liked how it worked well with clients with a mild learning disability. But actually it was quite clear that the negatives definitely outweighed the positives when they were talking about use of the screening tool, and they referred to it. One actually said it was infuriating, difficult to use, couldn't use it with clients with a moderate or a profound learning disability, difficulty communicating it to other professionals, it was time consuming, and there was just a general overall mismatch really with our client group. COVID was also really relevant, and that came up a good bit, talking about how we had to change how we were working, and participants felt that the MOHOST didn't really fit in with remote working, and also priorities as a service had changed, so that didn't work. The service evaluation was really useful, and it helped back up anecdotal reports, really, what people were saying on the ground, that more training is needed around MOHO. It's clear from the long list of negative, the negative list really, that the MOHOST doesn't fit in, and a more appropriate tool is needed. And it has really helped support our justification for funding of training around an alternative tool called the MOHO Explore. And that's really helped back up that really, and the clinical reasoning behind that. So as a service, we're going to use the MOHO Explore, which so far, see, it's early days, but seems like a really good fit. And the MOHO Explore is an adapted assessment for clients with complex needs. So it's not specifically tailored for clients with learning disability, but it really looks at those clients that have high needs. It offers a more appropriate level of rating scales for our client group, and it helps capture aspects that we were really missing or that were falling below or not being captured in the MOHOST. We're really excited to start rolling that out within our teams, and we hope it'll have a great impact on practice. And we hope that the service evaluation that we've done will really help inform how we go about training and how we address maybe future needs that will arise. When speaking about MOHO throughout the research, there was sort of a general negativity about its use, and people were sort of saying some throwaway comments like if we have to use it or if we're told we need to use it. So I think that will be something we need to look at as well, just really combating, making it a bit more positive, and maybe some practical support around workshops and discussions, just so we can all get a bit back on board really, and interested in the model of human occupation. And yeah, the plan is to kind of continue to share the results on days like today. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Clark. I'm a clinical lead occupational therapist for mental health in Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board and an advanced practitioner. Today I'm going to share with you research I conducted to investigate the effect of occupational therapy on diabetes self-management. The incidence of diabetes is growing, affecting 7.3% of the population in Wales, and yet only 10% of diabetics attend structured diabetes education. The Welsh Government plans to invest in services upstream, supporting self-management and harnessing multidisciplinary teams in primary care. Whilst working in a flagship Welsh primary care practice, I began to explore how occupational therapists may support diabetes self-management in those least engaged with their diabetes care team. Occupational therapists provide holistic, person-centred interventions to improve health and well-being by enabling participation in valued activities and occupations, providing practical support to improve independence and satisfaction with living daily life. It is believed that occupational therapy can facilitate the lifestyle changes needed to support diabetes self-management. A wide review of the occupational therapy literature was conducted. This demonstrated a potential role for the profession in supporting diabetes self-management across numerous studies in the United States. However, the skills of occupational therapists have not been exploited to enhance diabetic services in the UK, and there are no UK studies exploring their potential to do so. The purpose of this master's level study was to evaluate the effect of occupational therapy intervention on the diabetes self-management and occupational participation of type 2 diabetics within a Welsh primary care service. Ethical approval was obtained from Glyndŵr University, Leicester Research Ethics Committee, the Health Research Authority, and from Health and Care Research Wales. A concurrent triangulation mixed method study was conducted with 4 participants who were identified by their primary care diabetes team as having difficulty engaging with standard diabetic care. They were given pseudonyms Simon, Mandy, Thelma and Bob. Each received 5 or 6 one-hour occupational therapy intervention sessions. Pre and post testing was conducted using 3 standardised measures: the Stanford Self-Efficacy in Managing Chronic Disease 6-item scale, the Diabetes Self-Management Questionnaire, and the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. These were used to measure the impact of occupational therapy on self-efficacy, diabetes self-management, and occupational performance and satisfaction of participants' identified goals. Thematic analysis of post-intervention semi-structured interviews were conducted to triangulate and add richness to the results. Occupational therapy was focused around each individual's priorities and valued activities through setting personalised occupational goals. The 5 ways to wellbeing and social prescribing were harnessed to develop meaningful occupations and to increase activity participation. A detailed, holistic occupational therapy assessment was conducted with each person in their social and physical environment. This identified barriers to diabetes self-management. All participants had a poor understanding of what foods contain carbohydrates and what effect this has on blood sugar. Work, mobility, and family issues had prevented access to structured education and impacted on ability to make change. All had comorbid low mood and low self-esteem, affecting motivation. Mandy and Bob had little routine and unsupportive relationships. Thelma and Simon were restricted by mobility issues. Bob and Simon by pain and fatigue. A personalised occupational therapy intervention plan was written towards each individual's occupational goals. A variety of techniques were used to overcome barriers, activating motivation to change and enabling self-management. These included activity scheduling, problem solving, motivational interviewing, mindfulness, cognitive behavioural strategies, and pacing activity skills. An agreed number of sessions were planned and relevant skills and activities were practiced towards personal goals in small steps. Examples include setting an alarm on a smartphone to remind to take medication, reading and comparing food labels from the cupboard, family meal planning, mobilising with a kitchen trolley, finding ways to exercise in the local community, using crockery to manage portion sizes, and role-playing assertiveness techniques to challenge significant others. The quantitative results showed significant improvements across the standardised measures for self-efficacy, diabetes self-management, occupational performance, and satisfaction with occupational performance for each of the 4 participants. For qualitative results, line-by-line coding and thematic analysis of the semi-structured interviews was conducted after intervention. Themes and categories emerged about the patient's experience of occupational therapy. Here we can see improvements in the self-efficacy scores for the participants. We can see the improvements in the diabetes self-management scores for all participants. And here we can see the improvements in the performance scores for each participant's personal goals. For example, Simon began going out more with his family and reduced his portion sizes. Mandy started to stand up for herself at home, began singing with a band and joined a gym. Velma started doing her own housework and meal preparation, had a reduction in her care package and cut down on biscuits. Bob negotiated early retirement in work, bought a motorhome and took up photography when going on long walks. All 4 participants demonstrated significant satisfaction with their improved performance. The semi-structured interviews revealed 6 themes. The Making Change theme was made from categories about the triggers for change, reminiscence about the past self, effort and experimentation to create change, and the self-reward and optimism inspired by making change. The Managing Myself theme including categories about taking ownership of medical management, establishing routines, and gaining insight through knowledge and skills. The Lifestyle Choices theme included categories regarding making healthy choices through carbohydrate awareness, the barriers and enjoyment to healthy choices, taking pride in exercise and doing important activities. The participants identified the significance of supports, including partnerships, practical tools, and the effect of lack of support. Confidence grew through assertive communication skills, fostering a positive identity and developing determination to act. The impact of occupational therapy theme was categorised by the therapeutic relationship, medicalised attention, being empowered through therapy, gaining a sense of well-being, and developing aspirations for the future. This study is the first of its kind in the UK and endorses the existing literature from the United States that occupational therapy is effective in supporting self-management amongst diabetics. Occupational therapists could be utilised in enhancing diabetic services within UK primary care services, especially for those who are struggling to enact diabetes self-management behaviours due to complex physical, psychosocial and environmental barriers. Occupational therapy can untangle such issues, empowering diabetics to solve problems that prevent self-management and increase participation in valued occupations, rekindling hope for the future. Occupational therapists should harness the profession's breadth of knowledge and skills in offering supportive strategies that empower and improve each person's ability to live a healthy and fulfilling daily life. As this study was conducted as part of a master's, the time frame for completion was an academic year. This limited the number of participants that could realistically be included and the depth of investigation that could be conducted. However, single case studies and small study numbers can be involved in a meta-analysis as recommended by authors of literature found in the review. Further research is needed with a larger cohort and to a greater depth using a case study approach, maybe as part of a PhD. Finally, no other studies discussed the impact of intervention on hope and aspiration for the future, elements needed for successful management, and this could be an area for further research. Thank you for listening. Please post any questions.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm an occupational therapy student at Cardiff University. So myself, Abby, Nicola and Michelle carried out this project in partnership with the Older Adult Mental Health Services at Aneurin Bevan. It was overseen by Catherine and a PhD student from the university. Sorry. The Health Board had requested a review of the assistive technology available for people living with dementia in order to ensure an evidence-based approach to the recommendation and provision of assistive technology to help support occupational risk management. You won't let me click across, sorry, Catherine. The research project was completed in stages, started by using websites, blogs and social media platforms to establish the potential risks for those living with dementia and to identify what assistive technology was currently being used by them and their families. The next step was to conduct a literature search that was carried out using online databases to identify relevant articles relating to assistive technology and dementia. And this was done using key search terms surrounding dementia, risk, occupation and assisted technology. The articles were then critically appraised and the evidence synthesised to form the basis of a report and a database which could be used to support practice, offering practitioners a comprehensive evidence-based resource of available technology relating to specific risks that might impact individuals living with dementia. And then this is just a few examples of the key terms then that we did.
So what is a dementia? To be able to look at what assistive technology was available for people living with dementia, it was important for us to understand what dementia is and how it may affect individuals. It is estimated that in the UK there are currently 885,000 people over the age of 65 living with a dementia. 46,800 of whom live in Wales. A report commissioned by the Alzheimer's Society predicts that by 2040 these figures will increase to 1.5 million and 79,000 respectively. Dementia is a terminal disease and involves a progressive decline of cognitive function outside of the normal aging process. It is an umbrella term used to describe different conditions affecting the brain, and each disease has its own different cause and will be different for each person experiencing it. It will eventually impact their memory, language, cognitive function, ability to carry out ADLs, spatial awareness, movement, planning and judgment, behaviour and emotional control. The development of dementia can be split into 3 stages: early, middle and late, with individuals experiencing increasing difficulties as their dementia progresses, which may require increased levels of support from others. Those in the early stages may have difficulties with short-term memory and forgetfulness, but remain relatively independent, whereas those in the middle stage may have increased symptoms that affect their daily lives, such as communication difficulties and require prompting to carry out ADLs. In the late stages of dementia, individuals will probably be totally dependent on others. So these are 2 quotes that define assistive technology. They both infer that assistive technology is a device or an app that enables or assists a person to complete a task or activity that they may otherwise need assistance with. Next slide, please, Catherine.
So with dementia being so varied in the presentation from person to person, there's a range of occupational risks associated with them, which could limit their individual from doing the things they want and need to do, such as living independently and engaging in activities that are important to them. So this next part of our presentation will focus on some of the most notable technology we found associated with these identified risks. So the literature identified a vast range of assistive technology available that can enable a person living with dementia to remain at home and reduce their risk of falls, which can be a major concern for them and their families. Most notably, personal alarms, door alarms, movement sensors, pressure mats, home video systems and motion detecting light systems. These are particularly useful in increasing independence and safety, as well as reducing caregivers' anxieties. These technologies promote personal autonomy, enhancing quality of life and increase opportunities to perform activities which were considered important for their daily lives. And whilst not all can prevent a fall from happening, they allow for families, caregivers and emergency services to respond quickly in the event of a fall and therefore reduce the risk to the individual and increase their overall safety at home.
Self-neglect is defined as an extreme lack of self-care that can threaten an individual's personal health and safety. There was less robust evidence base for technology in relation to self-neglect in the literature, though this may reflect the broadness of the risk itself, encompassing a range of occupations such as personal care, food preparation and medication management. The literature offers evidence for reminder-based assistive technologies that reduce the risk of self-neglect, such as orientation clocks, reminder walls, scheduling tools, and medication reminders. Smart home technology was also identified as being beneficial, offering temperature controls and ways of monitoring medication use. Other evidence sources, such as Facebook and blogs, indicate a vast range of available technologies for self-neglect. Kitchen equipment and utensils that can aid food preparation and consumption, assistive care products and virtual assistants such as Amazon Alexa are also available. So home safety, fire and floods were highlighted in the literature as significant concerns for families of people living with a dementia, especially if the person lived alone or was alone for long periods of the day when family were at work. Home safety, fire and floods are high-risk consequences to inattention or distraction. There is a range of technology available to support these people living with dementia to remain in their own homes for as long as possible and as safely as possible. Technology can alert a person to something that needs their attention, such as a sensor measuring room temperature or a flood detector. Technology can summon assistance, such as a bed or chair occupancy sensor or a panic button, and it can also automatically assist, such as automatic falls alarms or door sensor alarms. Memory loss is probably the most recognised symptom of dementia, and there is a lot of technology available to support with some aspects of memory loss. There are everyday items such as Amazon Alexa, Siri and Google Home that can be programmed with reminders for appointments and birthdays or instructions for simple tasks such as making a sandwich or a drink. There is also assistive technology available for specific tasks or to simplify tasks, such as telephones that have pictures of family and friends instead of numbers to make telephone calls. When choosing an item of technology, it must be at the level that the user can understand, but it may also have a limited window of use. A person living with dementia declines cognitively and their problem skills will diminish, so technology, high or low tech, can make significant difference to their independence. Examples of this are memory boards, which can be as simple as a whiteboard with writing or pictures, or an iPad mounted on a wall that can remind a person where they are, what they like to wear, eat or do. Specialised clothing such as open back shirts or elasticated waist trousers mean that a person doesn't have to contend with zips or buttons. They can also have environmental control systems so that family can ensure the house is warm enough or cool enough, and this can also be connected to motion detectors and video doorbells to give family peace of mind.
Loneliness and a lack of social engagement can have a severe impact on overall health and well-being. So digital frames or personalised boards and other readily available technologies like the Echo Show or Google Nest can be used to make video calls to help maintain existing social connections with close family and friends, and helping to create feelings of safety and reassurance. There's widespread use of tablets such as iPads, Kindle Fire, and there's the Oscar Senior, which is aimed specifically at older adults. So games, puzzles, TV or music apps on these could be used to enable individuals to maintain or increase their social interactions and help lead to reduced feelings of isolation and also decrease any anxiety and depression. And these can be tailored to the individual and personalised to their needs. So using them for a short period, but regularly to allow those who might have difficulty concentrating to still participate in these activities. And then cognitive decline can make it difficult for individuals to keep track of time, creating further difficulties for them in their daily lives. So not knowing when to take medication or even missing appointments. And the literature provided evidence for a wide range of assistive technology with inbuilt alarms and reminders. So mobile phones, tablets, or even the virtual assistants, again, Alexas or Google Nests. But for those that might find these devices complicated or be unfamiliar with newer technology, it's possible to use devices aimed at specific requirements. So computerized medication dispensers or talking reminder clocks, or clocks with like a large HD display. And though it's important to note that whilst there might be assistive technology available, there could be other non-assistive technology solutions that can be just as effective to assist these individuals with timekeeping. So that includes calendars, diaries or whiteboards, which might be easier for them to use. Wandering and disorientation can become a major cause of concern for families and carers, both at home and in the community. And studies outlined a range of activity tracking devices that can be used to monitor activity and help identify patterns and solutions. And some ideas that were suggested through social media included personal trackers that also include alarms and falls detection features to help ease any worries that families might have. In the local community, mobile apps like Google Maps can be used to help individuals find their way to specific locations or reorientate themselves, which can offer some people and their families reassurance and security. However, others might dislike this use as it could make them feel that they were being watched. So it's really something that we need to consider when recommending this use of phones and really personalise it to that individual. Within the home, sensor lights and talking motion sensors could be used to prompt individuals that are likely to wander, or alternatively, visual aids can also be used, so memory walls to remind them of where they are and what they enjoy doing.
So another occupational concern was visual spatial decline. So this consists of the ability to understand what we see around us and interpret spatial relationships. So in a sense, it's a sense of awareness. So this affects how we interact with the world. So there's a difficulty with communication, including speech and hearing. There's an increased risk of not being able to engage in social occupations as people normally would, as well as you can imagine, changes in vision can also increase the risk of falls and decreases safety, which is especially a concern when you're trying to live independently. So our findings indicated that with assistive technology, there seem to be areas of focus around supporting perception through either enhancing visibility of common objects, like using magnifying lenses and things like that, or using other senses to enrich perception. So you can even get watches that actually talk and say the time out loud. And then there's motor skills decline. So this is more than just movement itself. It's the learned ability to cause predetermined movement with certainty and confidence. So without it, there's a difficulty with balance and mobility and coordination, again, a risk of falls, which could then impact about how a person navigates their home and their community. And this becomes problematic for daily tasks, even such as difficulties with using the stairs and other pieces of furniture, and even devices such as using a phone. So understandably, there's a big knock in confidence that underpins so much of what we do. So assistive technology for motor skills showed a trend in that they were mostly designed to compensate for the loss of motor abilities. So for example, there are enlarged device designs that were a bit more forgiving of inaccurate movement. So phone buttons were normally larger, or they were programmed to call a specific contact, or products also used other command signals for information input. So Amazon Alexa's actually responds to voice commands. However, again, for both visual spatial decline and also motor decline, in general, there were no clinical tests out there or qualitative explorations on such products. And this could be because this is an area as well that's problematic just for for people getting older rather than dementia specifically. But overall, the literature did indicate that with the severity of the condition in mind, many people living with dementia can actually live independently at home when using a compensatory approach. So loss of stimulation. Numerous studies have suggested that engaging in more mentally stimulating activities throughout life is associated with better cognitive function and protection against decline, and the same applies for those living with dementia. A lack of stimulation is related to reduced motivation and increased mood issues, anxiety and paranoia, which could impact upon a person's ability to participate in meaningful activities. But it's also related to occupational deprivation and boredom. And I'm sure, with the climate of COVID-19, we can all relate to how detrimental that is. And for people living with dementia, this is very much a loss of stimulation rather than a lack of. The literature indicates that this type of technology provides balance to a person's lifestyle, as they are often for leisure, which is an area grossly overlooked in both the older population and those living with these sort of conditions. The focus is normally around care and management. And yet this is a really exciting area of assistive technology. It will truly enrich people's lives. We found that the technology either fell into two categories. So you've had passive entertainment, so smart televisions, or active entertainment, such as pet robots and Wii consoles. Also, they're easily can be personalized to encourage more meaningful engagement. So you can get apps that actually exhibit personal photos to help encourage good memories and things like that.
So as we said, the research that we did actually contributed to both a database and a report that's going to be used to support practice, and it's going to offer, or it does offer, practitioners a comprehensive and evidence-based resource of the available assistive technology. And it includes all the technology that was identified from journal articles, websites, blogs and social media. And then from the database, it contains a brief description of each assistive technology, details of the evidence source, the occupations it would kind of cover, and the risks that it could be applied to. And also then the database can be maintained and added to as further assistive technology is developed and identified in practice, because obviously it's something that is always developing, so there's always something new, so it's really important for that to be able to be updated. And then that's just a quick example of it.
So to summarise, so many assistive technologies overlap across the risk categories, making these particularly cost effective. One of the most common technologies across all risks and mentioned in various evidence sources were virtual assistant devices and tablets. There are also many different types of apps that could be used alongside these, making them more diverse and addressing a range of difficulties. And also this technology is readily available, easily accessible and affordable compared with some of the more specialist technology. And also another benefit of these existing devices is that there's no stigma behind them. They're not seen as specialist equipment, and they're part of everyday life. And we found that the effectiveness of technology can be dependent, though, on the stage of dementia that the person was experiencing. And in the later stages, it can be more difficult to pick up and accept new, unfamiliar technologies. But that said, it is possible for these devices to be adopted and adapted to use in different ways as dementia progresses. And finally, we found that a lot of technology from the grey literature, like Facebook and blogs, were really helpful, but the research around them were less robust. There's definitely a need for further research into these assistive technologies. So the last message we really want to give out to you was about remaining person-centred, and despite the current success and the potential of assistive technology in dementia care, remaining person-centred is a challenge from design to implementation and evaluation. But remaining person-centred is possible, and it should be a key priority in the implementation of a standardised package of care. Through careful and holistic assessments and evaluation, listening to the wishes of those with dementia and carers, and clinically reasoned decisions, all of which carried out by a qualified practitioner, key concerns highlighted in the literature can be addressed. Assisted technology is more likely to be successfully integrated into people's lives, meaningful and essential occupations can be supported, and ethical concerns can be addressed and updated as the disease progresses. And the person, above all, can be treated with respect and dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of our first speakers. I think you all deserve a congratulations just for dealing with the technology and keeping to time, which I think is probably a first in a session like this, but well done. I think we've heard some really nice examples of collaborative working and also projects that kind of explore, you know, some of the really diverse nature of our work, and both in innovative possible interventions, but also reminding us about how assessment can be supported through theoretical models of practice. So thank you very much. I apologise if the chat function sounds as I'm talking, because I'm not quite sure we've worked out how to silence that. Can I encourage people now to upload questions into the question and answer box? So if you have any questions or comments in terms of any of the three presentations that we've heard so far, that would be really, really useful. I haven't got any as yet. So I'm just checking with Catherine that nothing's come through that I haven't been able to see. Can I maybe start by possibly asking maybe our first speakers, so to Rachel and Cole. I have to add a bit of a disclaimer in that I was very happy to support Cole as a supervisor from the university throughout her work with Rachel, and it was a great opportunity. But I'm just interested if one of you might make some comments in terms of maybe how you had to adapt the project, in terms you mentioned about sort of you know, the influence that COVID had on the work, but I just wondered in terms of your data collection and the sort of governance issues that you experienced around that, if you might say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and Laura, yeah, you were absolutely fantastic supporting the placement, and you're my ongoing go-to person with help as well, so that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it was a different world really when I started planning the service evaluation compared to when we were actually practically carrying out the interviews. And that was something that I suppose was quite exciting, but also increased some stress as well for Cole on her placements, where we had to think about how we were going to plan our interviews, which we normally would have done obviously face to face. Governance then as well, that was something we had to think about, because normally we would have the, you know, storing the transcripts, carrying out the interviews and recording of them and things like that. So we still did a lot of the principles that we would have done, but we just had to change the format really, where we did it over Teams. But I think by the time Cole was on placement, we were quite confident in using Teams, which made it quite good, I suppose, and less stressful for people. I don't know, Cole, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so it was quite a different process, and obviously having to then double check that we were meeting all the information governance regulations, made it like chasing up a lot of information. But then obviously if you are conducting interviews through Teams and using the health board emails, you can, if you save it onto the OneDrive, it's all saved securely then, so there's nothing saved then to personal devices, which is really, really helpful in maintaining all of the confidentiality that's required, so you're not breaching anything in that respect. But again, it was a learning curve to find out how to make sure everything worked appropriately. I know my first interview, we had a couple of technology issues, so that made things a little bit more stressful at the time, but then I think you quickly adapted into ways to create buffers and safeguards so that wouldn't happen again. Yeah, so it was lots to learn.
Yes, thank you. And I think, it was a learning curve for everyone involved in the project, but you managed it superbly well. And I think really good in terms of experience, for you, Cole, going into your dissertation and sort of progressing through your final year. So well done.
Definitely.
Yeah. OK, so we have a few questions popping up now. So I'm going to go to the first one, which is a question directed to the third presentation, please. This is from Sarah, making a comment on your interesting session. It's around the terms and conditions of using technology with clients. So Sarah's question is around whose responsibility it might be for accepting the terms and conditions of using technology, what personal information they store and who they share it with. So as occupational therapists, are we responsible if we recommend those assistive technologies as our interventions? Don't know if somebody from the group would be happy to respond to that.
I think when we presented this to the health board, it was something that was brought up about the kind of ethical considerations of it with regards to personal information on it, and also like if other people would be able to access it. So, like if they're using Alexa, could other people intercept it in any kind of way? But it wasn't very clear in a lot of the assistive technology in the journal articles and evidence that we looked at, that people had really considered the ethical kind of implications of it. But it would be something that I think going forward, if people were to continue with more research on it, that would be an area that needs a lot of research in it, if that makes sense.
Can I add in? I'm Jessica Moss. I'm the head OT for older adult mental health and ABHB, and I think that's a fabulous question, and it's something for all OTs, regardless of the service settings they work in, to actually think about that as an ethical consideration. And maybe we need to think about this as a profession, the ethical considerations of using assistive technology. And as was just said there, that perhaps we need to look at some research first to understand how some of those ethical dilemmas for practitioners now, and how they're getting over some of those, or things that we need to pay particular attention to as a profession. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. I think you've made a really good point, and I can imagine some of the complexity in view of the governance that we have that even differs between organisations, even within Wales. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting area in terms of further research and clarification. So thank you. OK, so the next question is to the second presenters, please. So this is around diabetes management and the outcomes regarding engagement in social activities and the community resources. Was there, so the question is asking if there were any medical-based results, so any outcomes perhaps as a direct impact of the the management of diabetes. So not just the more sort of psychosocial things, but any actual measurable outcomes in terms of the diabetes itself. So just wondering if either of the named presenters would like to make comment on that.
Yeah, so, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Lucy.
Yes, yeah, it was just myself, and the I can't remember what the scale was called. The diabetes self-management scale has questions about blood sugar, blood pressure, markers for managing diabetes. So yes, that scale is aligned with blood sugar, particularly as a robust tool for measuring whether somebody's diabetes self-management is influencing their clinical markers. So it was too complex to be able to pull them in to get a blood test. So that's why I chose that tool. In order to, I'm just trying to remember what it was called now, the diabetes self-management scale, because it was been found in research to align with those clinical markers as a valid measurement of ability to self-manage diabetes. So yes, not directly, but robustly indirectly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds great, and I imagine that particular outcome may have real value in terms of, trying to persuade service commissioners, or in terms of demonstrating the impact in which occupational therapy might have in sort of the wider primary care services. So that's interesting, thank you. Can I just ask, and you might have mentioned this at the beginning of your session, Lucy, was the sort of diabetes management client group, was that part of an existing role for an OT within a primary care service, or was that something that was, okay.
Yeah, so we there was a directly managed practice, so the GP service, the GP staff had handed in their notice, so the GP practice handed back its responsibility to the health board, and the practice was taken over by the health board, and instead of having just GPs, a multidisciplinary team was set up in Health Upastat in Iach, in BC, in the Health Board of BCU, and so there was a multidisciplinary team with occupational therapists as part of that, and my research was conducted as part of what I was not routinely providing to the GP practice, not obviously for all the people with diabetes, but those where the diabetic nurses were identifying that this person wasn't even turning up for appointments, maybe had gone off the radar for their routine diabetes self-management. And it's like, can we do some investigating? So quite often I would go to the person's house to engage them, to pursue them in a more assertive way, to find out what's stopping them coming along for their appointment, for engaging in sort of education packages that are already there through the expert patient program and through diabetes expert education program, and working one-to-one with those more complex people. And very often, as I said, it was the psychosocial issues that were getting in the way. So you start to deal with them, that has a direct impact on their diabetes. And what we're finding in North Wales is that GPs are slowly getting on board, because obviously we weren't just working with diabetics, working with frail elderly, with people with mental health problems, and right across all ages or conditions. But yeah, our primary care offer is increasing in North Wales.
Yeah, fantastic, and I think that will be of interest to many people, and obviously for our profession in terms of the opportunities for that sort of emerging role in primary care. Another really good example of our potential to add value and assist with that preventative approach within the community. So thank you very much. The next question is to Rachel and Cole in terms of MOHO Explore. So Sharon asks what you feel the most positive outcome of using MOHO Explore. So I suppose some may be less familiar with this particular tool, Rachel and Cole. So if you just say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So MOHO Explore has been around for quite a while, but actually hasn't been well used, not well known. We've just done our training in it now the last couple of months, and we're finding it absolutely wonderful, because the main practical difficulty really with the MOHOST was that there's a term, I suppose, bottoming out, or we just weren't, the client's level of functioning, it wasn't even reaching the lowest level in the screening tool. And we were missing a lot of, it didn't have sort of sensory approach, environmental was quite limited in the screening tool, whereas in the Explore it has a lot more detail, really geared and helpful for clients. So it's not tailored towards specifically people with a learning disability, but with complex needs. And we're finding it's really helpful in sort of supported housing, residential, because it looks at, in terms of the environment, you know, socially are their needs being met, emotionally are their needs being met, and it just looks at different levels that really captures the client that we're working with. So a client with maybe a moderate level of learning disability, or someone with dementia, or someone with maybe non-verbal communication skills. So we're finding it really helpful, because as we were talking, I suppose, in the interviews, the screening tool, people were using it for the sake of using it, and they just weren't feeling it was helpful. So the MOHO Explore, I definitely would encourage people who are working with that client group that have more complex needs. It's really helpful. And whereas previously we felt, I suppose, we were falling in between models, now we really feel that this will be helpful for us and just give us a bit more of that, I suppose, bolstering now, using a model and having that support and a bit more of a framework.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Rachel. OK, so I think we might have time for another question. And this is again to the group of students who did the assistive technology project. So again, a message of congratulations, but this is asking whether the work impacted on your set modules at university, or whether you found you had plenty of time to conduct the project. And so if somebody from the group would perhaps explain to the wider audience how that part of work fitted into your university requirements.
So we actually started this at the start of the summer holiday last year. And it's kind of developed into something quite massive. So we've presented a few times to the health board, and we presented also at the International Dementia Conference for Wales a couple of weeks ago. So although it hasn't directly impacted our modules, there has been some times where we've made extra time in our days to accommodate the interest that's been made in our research, because we've had some interest as well from companies that were interested in our research too. So it's kind of taken on a life of its own. Does that answer your question?
I think it's also safe to say as well, like, so we're a mixed team, so I'm a postgrad diploma student and the others are undergraduates, and actually I think that the undergraduates have had a lot more of a structured timetable, so I think it's been probably even more of a challenge that they've overcome to organise their time to do it, and whereas with me I think I had a little bit more flexible time, although it's hard to say what the workloads were like. I think the workload has fluctuated throughout the year, of course, but I don't want to speak on behalf of the others, but I think it's definitely served in my qualification and professional identity, and I'd encourage any student really to take it up.
Yeah, I agree with Nicola. It was done, like Michelle said, it was done a lot the timescale was longer than we expected, and actually 2 of us ended up on a placement with regarding people with dementia, so it really did help us in that way as well. But I don't really think it impacted my like my modules or what I was doing in uni. Actually helped it a lot.
It's Jessica Moss again, the head OT from ABHB. What we've done was we've made the AHP dementia lead for Wales aware of, she was aware of this because of the fact that the students had presented at the dementia conference for Wales. And what we're keen to do is look at how Natalie Elliott, who's the AHP dementia lead for Wales, has got fantastic ways of developing services on a all Wales basis, and this is something that could be tapped into on an all Wales basis as part of the dementia action plan. So at the moment they're developing standards for dementia care, which includes you know, the diagnosis and then what happens after diagnosis. And we've emailed Natalie to sort of say this will be absolutely essential in those standards in terms of assistive technology has to be key in being part of understanding, you know, how, as exactly as you're saying, supporting people with dementia live as independently as possible. So it could, you know, have such huge benefits for the nation of Wales and the people living with dementia. And what we're suggesting as well is that we could possibly have an intern or an evaluation student on an annual basis to perhaps update the database, as you were saying, Nicola, and hopefully you've done all the really hard sort of preliminary work, but that update then hopefully may be less time consuming, but again for the benefit, I think, of our profession and influencing the care of people with dementia living really well and independently in Wales. So thank you. It's just been an incredible piece of work. We've been blown away by it. They're fabulous students, and it really sort of flies the flag for OT making a difference to people living with dementia.
Thank you. And yeah, it sounds like such a great example of how we can use that partnership between universities and practice and have a real have the potential for some real impact in terms of our service users. So such an interesting thing to hear about. Thank you very much. Okay, I think that is the end of our question and answer session. Thank you for those that have put questions up. And to all of our speakers, again, I extend a thanks. Thank you very much for contributing this morning. I'm sure those that are listening in have really found your projects interesting, and I'm sure fuel some ideas in terms of, you know, things that could be done and collaborations that could be considered. So thank you very much. So I'll hand over now to Catherine, and I think we'll start the second session.
Good morning, I'm Jackie Davidge and I'm one of the occupational therapists in Torfaen Social Services. I'll just be giving a very brief introduction to explain the background to the project and then handing over to Linda and Paula to explain the project in more detail. Prior to March last year, we were quite a traditional service where occupational therapists conducted their assessments during home visits. Then overnight, COVID-19 caused rapid changes to our practice. We were primarily working from home and using digital technologies. As the months rolled on, it became apparent this wasn't really just going to be a short-term measure, and there would be implications for future practice. So with this in mind, I felt a project looking at the experiences of occupational therapists, clients and carers who had undertaken virtual assessments needed to be explored, and any potential recommendations for future practice. So over to Linda and to Paula to explain the project in more detail.
Morning. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So as Jackie was saying, COVID-19 had caused rapid changes to the service delivery, where many of the occupational staff began to work from home and rely on digital technologies. So within our 11-week critical evaluation placement, we basically did the placement virtually, and in light of this, a research project exploring the experiences of virtual assessments and the impact this may have was undertaken. And then within this study, then we made considerations and recommendations for future practices, and we'll be discussing this based on the findings of the project. So the data was collected over a 6-week period, and it was done via one-to-one semi-structured interviews. The participants of the study included 15 occupational therapy staff, 18 clients and or their informal carers, and 5 external agencies. So this included care homes and care agency staff. All data was collected over a 6-week period, and then upon analysing the initial data, we found 17 themes that were running through the data, and then together we condensed these into 6 main themes that we're going to be discussing today.
So as Linda has mentioned, we broke these findings down into 6 key themes. So they included confidence and experience, appropriateness, preparation and organisation, poor and inconsistent signal, wellbeing and staff retention. So firstly, looking at confidence and experience, this was referred to throughout our interviews with the OT staff. So the occupational therapist experience as a professional and their confidence appeared to increase as their knowledge increased in the completion of virtual assessments. And then with clients who had more experience with a virtual assessment, they reported feeling more confident and more certain with it, for example, through the GP. And then those clients with no prior experience expressed feelings of anxiousness and being unsure of what to expect. And then further experiences reported by occupational therapy staff included knowledge of a given area, such as housing layouts within areas, and prior knowledge of the services available. So then we looked at appropriateness. So it was really important to note that not all referrals are appropriate for a virtual assessment. So clients may lack the digital skills due to little or no experience with the technology or having no support to assist with this. So a virtual assessment can also be inappropriate in relation to things like sight, hearing, mental health issues, or falls risk. And then research by Greenhall and Wertan in 2020, they evaluated this virtual platform Attend Anywhere, and they noted that there's this importance of utilising your clinical reasoning in regard to the appropriateness of a virtual assessment and the inappropriateness of completing a virtual assessment with those who have more complex conditions or needs or impairments. And then occupational therapy staff, they also felt that virtual assessments appeared to be more appropriate for lower level home adoptions, equipment reviews, and some manual handling. And then according to Digital Communities Wales, over 10% of people in Wales are not online, and in their view it is paramount for more people to become digitally inclusive. And then clients were also asked if they would be happy to receive a virtual assessment in the future, all of who reported yes under certain conditions, such as if they had someone to support them, if COVID-19 was still a risk, or if they had no other option. But for most, a home visit is preferred. As you can see from this direct quote, face-to-face is more relaxed. And then a large proportion of clients did require assistance. And if you just go on to the next slide, I can show you a graph. So as you can see from this, then 4 clients partner assisted, with nine family members assisting, 1 live-in carer, and actually only 1 client was able to complete the virtual assessment independently. So this is really important to note in terms of appropriateness and having that support during a virtual assessment. So preparation and organisation then. So as such a new aspect, and especially in these times, it's really important to note that preparation and organisation is thorough. Research by Atwell et al. In 2008, they have noted that patients often have concerns surrounding these home assessments due to the wide range of aspects that need to be observed and discussed. And this was echoed during our research during client interview, whereby an informal carer stated, we'd never had an OT assessment before, so we were unsure of what to expect. And this really highlights the importance of fully informing the client and the family member. So in terms of future practice, this could involve the initial phone call clarifying these aspects and stating what the virtual assessment will involve in an attempt to avoid these feelings of overwhelmness. And then an occupational therapist also emphasised in an interview that risk assessing each client individually is really important to ensure that we are following in line with the appropriateness. And then we had poor or inconsistent signal. So this was reported consistently throughout the interviews as a potential barrier to our virtual assessments. Whenever signal is poor, this can affect the assessment process. Picture and sound quality can be impacted, and this can lead to a breakdown in communication. So a study by Crouch in 2010, they've highlighted that poor camera quality can be a challenge for effective communication, as well as these interruptions to sound and picture, and making it quite difficult to make these interpretations. So relating this to occupational therapy, these facial expressions and responses are really important in our assessments and our input. So it's even more important in a virtual assessment to ensure that communication and clarification are consistent to compensate if there's poor signal. And then we had clients and informal carers, as well as external agencies. They all shared concerns about signal, and we are aware that there's no quick solution to this, but it's just something to bear in mind and something we suggested to management when we presented this.
So, staff wellbeing in their occupational balance is recognised as an important factor within healthcare, with the Royal College of Occupational Therapy stating in 2020 that as a professional, looking after your own health and wellbeing during these unprecedented times is paramount to be able to be better equipped to support and look after others to help maintain their health and wellbeing. So when completing this study, OT staff reported a good level of wellbeing, and this was due to staff understanding the importance of taking regular breaks from the screen, ensuring adequate time is taken between each assessment, so not rushing from one to another, having the ability to be somewhat flexible within their working hours, and being mindful of their work-life balance. As part of the study, we asked OT staff their level of job satisfaction since the implementation of the virtual assessments, and a small percentage stated that their job satisfaction had slightly decreased, but all reported that their work-life balance had improved. So on further investigation, this decrease in job satisfaction appeared to stem from the amount of time a staff member was spending in isolation at their home, or not having the social interaction and professional conversations that would have experienced in the office environment. Also, the decrease in face-to-face interactions with clients and not being out there, but staff felt that they experienced a sense of achievement for adapting and maintaining their best practice within this rapid change of service delivery. So when we were looking into the study, we looked at the benefits of virtual assessments, and these were the main ones that were identified. So the first one being the more effective use of time, with Ninnis et al. In 2019 stating that virtual assessments could help reduce travelling times, and therefore OT staff could overcome usual time restraints to their practice. Also, overcoming geographical distance. Again, saving time travelling to and from home visits or external meetings, etc. Also, there was an improvement in organisational coordination and technology skills, as well as communication skills, and we found this was due to adapting to the new way of working. So along with the benefits, we had to look at the barriers. So the barriers that we recognised were the inappropriateness of virtual assessments for the more complex adaptation or manual handling cases, or in case of risk assessment where it would be deemed inappropriate, the poor or inconsistent signal within the geographical area, and staff also repeated reported an increase in difficulty in building rapport with a client through virtual means, as well as reporting feelings of loneliness and isolation of having to shield or to work from home.
So as you can see here, clients were asked how satisfied they were with their virtual assessments, and all reported that they were either satisfied or very satisfied. And this was a fantastic reflection of the services provided by occupational therapy and Torvine Social Services. So we just included some of the really positive client feedback. So we'll just read through some of the quotes now. So, very satisfied, getting things sorted was great.
The OT was fab.
Very satisfied, helped my mum a lot.
I was even able to go outside and show off my garden.
The OT was really good, really helpful.
Wonderful. So, in conclusion, the aim of the study was to explore experiences of occupational therapy, virtual assessments within Torvine Social Services, and putting forward recommendations for future practice based on the findings that we discussed today.
Overall, then, virtual assessments, they do offer the potential to have a place in future practice, as it increases effectiveness alongside reducing costs. However, the barriers should always be recognised for future practice, especially in the sense that not all cases are appropriate for a virtual assessment.
We also recognise that there is limited research and literature in relation to COVID-19 and virtual assessments. So, you know, it's a subject that could be open to more research.
So this initiative has been able to identify areas worthy of further research within Torvine Social Services, but also beyond this. And this research has highlighted the sheer professionalism and efforts of occupational therapy staff to maintain their highest level of care and service throughout this pandemic. So then, building on the findings of this project, best practice has been identified, and it is equally as important to make recommendations for future practice and for the service to consider for the implementation of improvements. So ensuring continued high quality care is being delivered to all clients. So firstly, we created a crib sheet so that it was available to all staff on the shared drive so that they could access. It was specifically in relation to virtual assessments, and it went through the key areas to be covered to ensure a quality and consistent service.
We also recommended that there was more group supervision and support for staff that were feeling isolated or not supported whilst they were working from home.
And then we have investment into training and development to enhance digital inclusion throughout the area for staff, clients, families, carers and external agencies. As well as this, it's providing that encouragement so that they can utilise the available mediums which they already have.
And then further research we recommended for this because there is a huge gap in the literature out there about COVID-19 and virtual assessments.
And then lastly, preparation has been highlighted as a significant factor throughout, especially during the information gathering and the initial telephone call. So ensuring that the client or their carer is fully aware of the need for assessment is imperative. And then utilising your professional reasoning and also possibly having a backup plan, as we know that technology doesn't always work in our favour. So having a backup plan on the day is always beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so my presentation is on how the use of social media by practicing therapists acts upon their professional identity. So it's a phenomenological collective case study. So a recent study by the communications body Ofcom found that nearly 2.5 hours is spent daily by smartphone users accessing, with 3 out of 4 internet users having social media accounts. Under the World Federation of Occupational Therapists definition of occupation, the everyday things people evidently social media has become an occupation within the lives of many nowadays. Two of the Royal College of Occupational Therapists' current strategic intentions are to position the organisation in the 21st century to enhance the profile of the profession to a range of audiences, which evidently goes hand in hand with use of platforms. So the study was aimed at providing an insight into the impact of social media on the profession of occupation. For the study, a literature review was completed, which highlighted a lack of credible research on the use of social media by occupational therapists. Initially, the literature review was just going to be focused on occupational therapists and use of social media. However, this was expanded to healthcare professionals. Exclusions to the literature review were articles relating to media use for personal reasons and also use with or by patients. 8 articles were selected, and then from the literature review, the main focus of articles were levels of engagement and also benefits of use. And these were found, well, when I was reading through the literature review and the research findings, it really corresponded with Wilcox's framework of doing, being, becoming, belonging. So the objectives for the study were centred on these 4 things. So doing this was exploring the current engagement with social media. Being was exploring the individual perceptions of work-related social media life, and becoming identifying the impacts of social media use on personal and professional development. And belonging was examining if and how use leads to a sense of wider community. So for the data collection, ethical approval was granted via the university and the local health board. An initial sampling survey was sent to the local health board gatekeeper, and then 4 participants were purposefully selected from a range of different clinical settings and different experience. Participant information and consent forms were issued, and then semi-structured interviews were subsequently conducted, and questions were based on Wilcox's framework of doing, being, becoming, belonging. And then data analysis was subsequently completed using Braun and Clark's framework. Themes were examined within the occupational science framework, and methodological triangulation was applied via supervision, use of existing literature, and the data findings, all to add to the credibility. Okay, and then from this, 4 key themes were really taken from the data. So these were consciousness, widening connections, contextual influence, and professional development. And from these 4 key themes, different subcategories were developed, which are outlined on the illustration below. And then I'm going to discuss how this related to the doing, being, becoming work. So the contextual influence or the doing of the activity itself. So time and access were some of the main reasons cited that were a barrier to use of social media platforms. Half of participants use platforms as part of their daily role to meet service needs. So these participants were integrating use of social media into their daily work lives. And so I found this really interesting, in that the doing of the social media activity related to the being, shaping their current professional identity. And this really corresponded with Christianson's theory on the interlinked dynamic nature of our identity, which is shaped by the activities of doing while simultaneously influencing that which we choose to do. Please. And next was sorry, I can't really find this word, difficult to say, consciousness, or the being. And these related to both the person's understanding of their current professional identity, and also of the interlinked nature of kind of personal and professional. And so a consciousness around professional requirements and the visibility of profiles was linked to a hesitancy among some to actively engage in platforms through fear of a kind of rebuke if they said something out of turn on the platforms themselves. And so often they took more of what was considered a lurker role, and there was a fear of kind of putting oneself out there. Also a need to maintain a healthy work-life balance presented as a concern by some, especially those that weren't integrating it into their actual workday and were using it more out of hours. And the blurring of professional and personal domains, subsequent over-engagement, has been found within the research examined to increase vulnerability to burnout. After a bit more research around these domains, there is currently little guidance provided from either professional bodies or employers on appropriate use of platforms professionally. Most of the guidance provided really seems to be on professional reputation and not so much on how to integrate use of social media into one's everyday working life. And really the research was calling out for further workplace training and guidance from professional bodies and employers on how social media can actually be effectively used by occupational therapists or healthcare professionals within their everyday working life. Widening connections. So this was quite a big theme that emerged from the data findings. Social media platforms, by their very design, are encouraged to create online communities and to create that communication with others. And so this really reinforced the sense of belonging among participants. There was recognised benefits of sharing experiences with other professionals and examples of best practice. Participants really valued the opportunity to connect with different professions, so not just other occupational therapists, but also doctors, other AHPs, and this was felt to be more reflective of real MDT practice. And this was also found within the research examined. And this belonging to the online collective has been found to reinforce core beliefs and knowledge, which can therefore reinforce one's own professional identity. I found it quite interesting that peer support was particularly valued during periods of uncertainty and formative years. This was echoed within research. The participants interviewed spoke of times when they'd gone into new areas of practice or were transitioning from student to actual clinician, and that they really felt that the social media was valuable in kind of communicating with other professionals that were more experienced within the area and sharing those best practices. And then lastly, becoming. Professional development goes hand in hand with the belonging, really, and that the 24/7 access to updated resources and shared experiences was really valued, both within the research conducted, the study conducted, and also the research subsequently. I found it quite interesting that most of the participants interviewed failed to recognise use of social media as actual CPD activity. They spoke of the need for reflection on the findings, that they felt that they weren't reflecting enough on the findings for it to be counted as CPD activity. And therefore it can be said that an element of being was required for it to be interpreted as a sense of becoming. There was also caution from participants as to the credibility of information access. And research suggests that the prioritisation of easily accessible information by professionals can lead to over-reliance on perceived experts. And when the critique is kind of taken out of accessing the information, I think there is a real concern really as to when one's on social media platforms, whether we're actually critiquing some of the information there. So main limitations to the study itself were that it was very small scale in design and a limited number of participants. There was use of a single gatekeeper, which limited the study to occupational therapists working within a particular health board within the NHS. Subsequently, local authority and private practice occupational therapists were admitted from the study, and it was localised to my location. Thus, results are regionalised. And the two main key findings that came about from the study is that social media use has the potential to develop individual and collective professional identities of occupational therapists. The second key finding was that there needs to be a wider recognition of the value of platforms by both employers and also by professional bodies. So to conclude, the research study sought to provide a bit more of an insight from occupational therapists into the impact of social media use upon their professional identity. Use of platforms can strengthen both individual and collective professional identities, enhancing the modern day profile of the profession, and therefore meeting the ARCOT's conventions. Concerns over credibility of information accessed, as well as potential infringement upon personal identity, must be noted and explored further. And the role of employers in recognising the value of social media use for professional purposes is also worth further consideration. Thank you very much for your time.
Hello, my name is Jessica Kenner, and today I'm joined by my two student peers, Anya and Jade, and our educator on our placements, Emma Anderson. And today we'll be discussing our role emerging school-based placement. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about our journey through our placement, and we'll begin by giving a background and the origins of the role emerging placement in the school setting. We'll then move on to the process and key principles. And we'll then follow with findings and themes from the student's perspective, and then we'll finish with what we learned and where we plan to go from here.
So the project began around 3 years ago when it was identified that a large number of children were experiencing occupational difficulties in the school environment. We had an increase of 30% increase in referral to the service, and the traditional service model was not sustainable or equitable, and the concern of not reaching children in a timely manner presented a challenge. So this led to discussions between the Aneurin Bevan Health Board and education leaders, with the aim to understand the needs of the children, were there clusters of particular areas of need, the skills and training needs within the school community, and we know that there's a huge amount of skill with our teachers, and could we utilise that, and to understand the added value that OT based in the school environment could make. So this led to considering a service redesign to adopt a tiered level of service provision and the role emerging placement. So I took the student project pathway. I looked to develop a process to support educators in alternative placements. So we looked at the pre-placement requirements and also the planning with the students on placement, and then the requirements for that. Some of the key principles that emerged from that. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you. Some of the key principles that emerged were that regular communication with the host supervisor was essential throughout the placement. The pre-placement visit was used to establish the expectations from the school and the learning opportunities for the student, which were evaluated and managed throughout. Prior to the start of the placement, students were encouraged to consider how they could protect their professional identity, develop their role and understanding of OT without daily contact, and most importantly, how they could build resilience and maintain their well-being. And as a supervisor, the question that initially concerned me was, how can I be confident that the students are learning and developing when I'm not directly observing them? This required me to change my supervision style to take a more facilitating role. The students participate in the weekly PBL session and individual supervision with the expectation that they would be responsible for direction of learning. bringing evidence for discussion with the understanding they present their clinical reasoning, which was respectfully challenged to develop skills. And I was actually delighted when the students then started challenging me on why I'd decided to take a particular route with the children. It's also recognising that at some points formal teaching was important for them. And I have to say the students were teaching us throughout as well, and provided insight that we have yet to achieve using the traditional service model. Some of the protective factors that supported me as a supervisor were clear channels of communication, the use of care aims and model to frame the learning, clinical reasoning, regular supervisions and regular check-ins.
So I was based in an ASD base within a mainstream school.
And Jess and myself worked in a special school for children with autism spectrum disorder where there was no previous OT service in place.
Our experiences were quite similar, so we will discuss together what we have learned throughout these placements. Next slide, please, Catherine. So we will use the RCOT Career Development Framework today to demonstrate our development over the course of the placement. The framework sets out pillars of development for all levels of occupational therapy practitioners and students and in a variety of settings. So we'll use this today to demonstrate our learning. So we'll begin with the leadership pillar. So Role Emerging Placements challenged us to take leadership in promoting the profession and facilitating teamwork in an autonomous and creative way to ensure effective service delivery. Initially, this was quite challenging as we experienced role blurring and professional identity crisis. Limited previous OT presence meant that school staff had a limited understanding of our roles. Being a student was beneficial in this situation as we cautiously advocated our role and were eager to learn about theirs, leading to a mutual sense of respect in the professional relationship. Gradually, staff understood the OT vision, leading to effective team working towards our goal of quality care.
There were no existing platforms for effective team working, requiring us to develop these to ensure good quality care. We all took responsibility for setting up weekly meetings to share and receive information which ensured we were working towards a shared goal. We found communication was key in facilitating teamwork as it enabled us to share plans, goals and outcomes which ensured consistency in care provided and broadened staff understanding of our roles, therefore referring students to us for difficulties we had not yet observed.
Additionally, we recognised the strengths and needs of the team. The Care Aims framework encouraged us to consider who was best placed to have the biggest impact, leading to the empowerment of those most proximal to the children to implement the OT principles. Staff were then able to adapt what they had learned and transfer this knowledge to other children, improving outcomes. Staff gave feedback that they felt equipped to manage the children's less complex needs independently. So the Role Emerging Placement has provided us with the experience and skills to take leadership in facilitating effective teamwork, which we can transfer to other settings. We both faced new challenges in the setting, and peer support offered a valuable platform to develop compassionate leadership skills, supporting one another through open, honest and empathetic communication. We utilised peer support to promote each other's well-being, which led to improved service delivery and outcomes.
This was used in both placements, with myself and my colleague initially working together during our assessments and planning to fine-tune our process and working routines, which long-term encouraged our autonomy in practice.
As part of the facilitation of learning pillar, we spent much time working alongside staff to facilitate discussions around children's occupational barriers and strategies to address these. We used coaching to encourage staff to identify solutions to occupational interruptions and develop their understanding, which in turn increased their confidence. Staff reported that this had a positive impact on their practice, as well as having future implications for children in their care as they continue to apply these skills. Other opportunities for facilitation of learning included modelling interventions, providing a twilight training session to the school staff, and creating videos to inform and educate staff and parents that could be referred to when our placement had finished.
On my placement, external challenges such as staffing and the number of students in the base resulted in an initial discussion with the staff team on our service aims and the interruptions that we would be targeting. Feedback and education for staff would follow our intervention or would be observed by staff during our sessions, such as our dressing group. Upon the placement completion, staff similarly reported that their confidence to complete interventions following our example for other children with similar needs. The literature indicates that the most successful Role Emerging placements are undertaken by at least 2 students, improving their confidence and allowing for peer supervision. Over the course of the placement, we took turns in undergoing peer supervision together identifying areas of practice that we could both improve on and therefore facilitate each other's learning.
So moving on to the professional practice pillar. The literature discusses a concept of professional socialisation that involves adopting the values, roles and skills that enable one to function as a member of a cultural group. So if we consider occupational therapy a cultural group, having no OT presence at our placements posed a challenge to maintaining professional identity and boundaries. One of the contributing factors to this was the general lack of insight into the scope of OT among many staff members, which was common across both placements.
In our placements, initially we experienced challenges with staff as they assumed that we were aiming to undermine and replace their roles.
However, on mine and Anya's placement, there was an expectation that we were sensory therapists. Although we tried to express that this was an aspect of our role, if the sensory difficulties were impacting on a child's occupations, this was an ongoing issue throughout the placement. We did notice small changes in discourse as staff began talking about the children's engagement in activities, and we also had some diverse referrals. Continually advocating our role and supporting staff to develop their understanding of our role was extremely valuable in developing our sense of professional identity.
Long-arm supervision was a key component in our placements, contributing significantly to the development of professional identity and providing an opportunity for professional socialisation. We were able to refocus our preconceived assumptions of the occupational therapy role in the setting and felt more confident in taking ownership of promoting the OT role. Meanwhile, it facilitated the development of our autonomy and creativity as individual practitioners, as we felt we had the freedom to do so, unlike more traditional placements where there can be an expectation to model our educators.
A model of practice helped us to regain our occupational focus in the first weeks and facilitated clear decision making. We initially planned on using the MOHO to guide our analysis of the pupils and their engagement in occupations, as we found the emphasis on volition, interests and habituation to be useful in facilitating a person-centred approach, and thought that this would be beneficial in guiding planning and interventions. However, we found that the POP enabled a more holistic exploration of the child's development, enabling us to link occupational performance to environment, which was particularly relevant considering we were based in a school. Furthermore, the POP model seems to use more accessible terminology, which enabled us to better communicate our input with each child to staff members.
During my placement, we also used the PEOP model to guide our development of occupational goals with our students. We used this model to support our clinical reasoning on interventions, identifying occupational interruptions and reducing the risk of foreseeable harm due to lack of engagement. Moving on to the evidence, research and development pillar. Being in role emerging placements, the use of evidence base was imperative to support our decision making and ensure that we were working in line with policy and legislation. For us, the Care Aims framework and the response to tiered intervention model were useful in guiding our use of the evidence base and supported our professional reasoning, refocusing our thought process on wellbeing outcomes. Importantly, it provided a common language for communicating our decisions. This promoted the effectiveness of service delivery by ensuring that interventions were provided when necessary, as opposed to ongoing interventions that were unachievable and unrealistic at the time for that individual. This led to timely and appropriate referrals, and in the longer term could lead to reduced waiting lists.
From our placement, we all felt that the role of OT added value to the children's care. In the special school, we found ourselves providing around 40% specialist interventions, 40% targeted and 20% universal. However, we thought that the universal tier had the biggest impact, followed by targeted and then specialist.
In contrast, we found that due to working across many locations within the mainstream school, offering universal interventions will be beyond the scope of a 12-week placement. Therefore, we successfully offered 6 specialist tier interventions, 1 group intervention and a number of targeted suggestions for environmental adaptations in the base.
We all found that being present at the school throughout the day, Catherine, can you go back a slide, please? Sorry. We all found that being present at the school throughout the day and making ourselves part of the classroom gave us unique opportunities to assess or intervene in all activities throughout the school day as we saw issues arise. This was a huge benefit of OT presence on site, as we were always on hand to get involved or offer a different perspective as required. Staff also fed back that they appreciated having the opportunity to ask us questions in passing in the corridor.
In addition, we were less noticed by the children with ASD, who are easily affected by change. After a few days working in the classroom, the children soon lost interest in our new faces, and the behaviours that staff were reporting came to life. Assessing the children in their context, where their occupational performance is not affected by being removed into a new environment, enabled us to have more valid observations of them than we may have otherwise.
As we integrated so thoroughly within the support staff team, we would also accompany students that we were working with to their mainstream lessons, observing them across many environments. The extended time spent with the base students allowed us to build such a rapport that students would turn to us for advice regarding a variety of issues they faced within school, not just to discuss the goals we had identified and were working towards.
On both placements, we also saw the value of quickly integrating into the staff team. From our first minutes within the school, we recognised the staff's unique skill set and rapport with the children. Without collaborative goal setting, we would not have established the children's wants and needs in line with the ALM bill, particularly as most of the children we worked with could not communicate this themselves.
However, we found that it was vital to consider our communication style with staff. Learning from staff expertise was so important to build rapport, yet at times there was a need to assert ourselves appropriately, as students can be easily overlooked. Collaborating with staff also ensured the sustainability of our input for when our placement came to an end.
As an educator, I felt a huge sense of responsibility and a desire to protect the students, which can limit opportunities and development, but by trusting in the process of the protective factors, autonomy was achieved. And because the students took responsibility and directed their own learning and developed their understanding of OT in this setting, they become experts. And using the coaching model has transformed my supervision style. So that one was facilitating and mentoring. And because I think there was a secure base for the students to return to that enabled them to be more autonomous and to ask questions and to challenge respectfully within those settings. So our next steps, we're sharing our experiences on a wider platform, supporting others to supervise students on alternative and role emerging placements. We're now looking to extend our alternative placements to Flying Start and some of our other providers in the vision impairment service, and also to explore different models of practice placement supervision throughout. So the peer-to-peer support, which I know our students found that really, really useful, near-peer, 4-to-1 models, and to share the evidence to influence provision, so the role of OT in school. Collaborative teaching sessions with our education staff. So, as I mentioned, there's such a wealth of knowledge and expertise and enthusiasm within our school environments. And we plan to publish the findings from this study further afield. Thank you for listening, and if there's any questions, we'll happily answer them.
Okay, thank you very much. Some three more really interesting, innovative and relevant presentations. So we'll open up now for questions. So if you'd like to put your questions in the live Q&A panel, and I can direct those to the relevant speakers. So to start it off, I can see there's one question already from Lizzie, referring to the Torvine virtual assessment presentation, just asking about the cost and time advantages and disadvantages of this method of service delivery and service planning, and how it might influence the long-term planning. So could somebody from the Torvine group just respond to that question? Jacqueline?
Yeah, hi.
Hiya, thank you.
Well, I know that the virtual assessments definitely don't appear to, I've done them myself, and I know that they don't appear to take as long as you would for a home visit, often because of the geographic area of Torvine. We are based across the borough, and you know, we could travel quite a distance normally to complete a home visit anyway. I think your preparation, you need to spend more time in preparation for a virtual assessment, but overall I think it is a less time than completing more traditional home visit. I know that it is something that's been discussed with senior management about the way forward, because we do appreciate it's not for everybody, but there may be a place for it in future practice. So, you know, there are pros and cons. I think you are looking as well at sort of reducing waiting lists by not spending so much time. So we you know, that is something that is in consideration after COVID as well.
Thank you, thank you. And I just had a question as well related to that, really, and related to what you were saying, Jacqueline, around what role do you feel virtual assessment will play in long term in future service delivery?
Well, I do think it will play a role, and I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted the project, to make sure that if it is going to play a part in future, then, you know, we need to make sure that there were some quality and standards, and you know, we were doing the best that we could by using a virtual platform. I know, as I said, senior managers have seen the report. They are looking at it. They're also looking at the implications that were brought to their attention around staff retention and well-being of staff as well, because that also forms part of that bigger picture. But I haven't had any feedback yet, because we're still in the same scenario a year later, where we're still doing those virtual assessments as a first means. So it's used as a first means, and also from the feedback that we've had from our clients and carers, yes, they do feel there's a place for them, but they did still prefer home visits in most cases.
Okay, that's interesting, isn't it? Interesting feedback.
Yeah, our client group is primarily, although we do see people from adults, it's mainly an adult service, although there are some younger children as well. But most of our clients, I would say, the older edge of the population. So they did need support to be able to take part in the assessments.
Yeah, and that's interesting, and that links, doesn't it, to your comments around as ensuring as a profession, really, that we are digitally inclusive and we're not excluding people because of our expectations around digital skills. Lovely. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you. Is there any questions from anybody? Any other questions?
Rhiannon, I've just posted 2 more in the Q&A. So there's one from Lucy.
Brilliant. I've missed
Hannah.
Lovely. So so first of all, from Lucy, regarding the social media presentation. So Lucy's asking a question to Lucy. Do you have any recommendations regarding the separation of the personal and professional use of social media, and how the Royal College and employers can support clear boundaries and professionalism? And I think this is particularly relevant at the moment, isn't it, when all of our working and personal lives are maybe more blurred because of home-based working as well. So Lucy, are you able to answer that question, just thinking about personal and professional boundaries and how managers and RCOT can support professionalism?
I think that a big barrier for those interviewed, obviously it's quite difficult because it was only done within the local health board, but actually accessing platforms. So often there's restrictions on firewalls where you could only access the platforms for, say, 5 minutes in a day. So those were actually using it within their personal, in their professional day-to-day working lives, had to kind of format any posts prior to posting, and then use that 5 minutes to just post the content. But obviously then you can't kind of monitor that over the day, and so they were having to use their personal devices to often post content if they were using it within their day-to-day working lives. And for me, I think that there needs to be a bit more of a recognition of appropriate use of social media platforms within the workplace, and to enable people to actually use it within their day-to-day working lives, using it appropriately, obviously, and only for professional reasons. And I think that that's where the difficulty probably lies, and how do you monitor that when it's being used appropriately and when it's obviously not being used appropriately. And I think that that's probably where the difficulty lies. But I do think that there should be further research on kind of how it could lead to potential burnout, because I do think about those that are actively engaging in it, and you can see them posting on it at night, and I think that there is a real threat there, that there's not that separation between professional and personal lives as such. But there wasn't really much research into that. That was more kind of out of my own interest and from the findings. But I do think that there's scope for further research on how people are switching off, and especially, as Rhiannon said, in our day-to-day lives, what with COVID now, it's kind of blurring the lines more and more. So yeah, I don't think that really answers the question, but I think there's definitely scope for more research.
That's great, Lucy, thank you. And linking to the future research, Alex is just asking Lucy around whether your full research is available to read online, because she's interested and would like to look at the literature around this. Is your research available online at all, Lucy?
No, not to my knowledge. I think the presentations are being shared after this, though. But I mean, the references in the presentation, you could go on those, but as I said, really there's very limited research online. I think there's a couple that are focused just on occupational therapists, but aside from that, it was mainly other AHPs that had completed research into it, or other professionals.
Lovely, thank you, Lucy. And the next question is for the virtual assessment for the Torvine group again, just regarding what platforms we use to conduct the virtual assessments, and I'm thinking about the ethical considerations, for example, using WhatsApp video or My Teams video. Should we as OTs be aware of the terms and conditions of using these platforms? So 2 questions: which platforms were used, and what considerations do we need to make around terms and conditions? And that's for the Torvine group. So maybe Jackie, Linda or Paula?
Yeah, I'll just say that we did discuss it with senior management, who outlined the platforms that we were allowed to use. And they determined that we were allowed to use either Teams or WhatsApp. We didn't video anything, it was live, just live, and they were in the opinion that that was appropriate to be able to be used for the virtual assessments, not just for OTs, but for any member of staff who was going to be conducting virtual assessments.
Fantastic. Such a rapidly changing area of practice, isn't it? It's keeping it. Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Jackie. So now a question from Sharon for the school-based OT group. So she just wanted to highlight the value of these placements and the impact on practice. And that there's going to be, long-term future permanent changes for occupational therapists based in schools. And her question is, how was the biggest impact of universal provision measured in the school-based placement? So how did you measure the impact of the universal provision? So if any of the students from the school-based placement group would like to answer that.
Hiya, my name's Jess.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in. So with the universal interventions, we used care aims to guide our thought process and occupational therapy process, which looks at empowering those most proximal to the service user with the idea that they can have the biggest impact. And that was really evident in the school, because time constraints and lack of resources, sometimes it was difficult for us to take children out of the classroom for specialist interventions, and sometimes it was difficult to intervene in the classroom as using a specialist intervention, because we did always need the support of a teacher or teaching assistant, which wasn't always possible with the time limitations. So we found that universal provision was the most effective because it meant that we could provide the staff with a kind of general breadth of knowledge, which they could then adapt and use with a range of children that they worked with, which meant that there wasn't always then a need for them to refer to occupational therapy if the needs were less complex, and it empowered them. And in terms of sustainability, it provided a more sustainable service. And we didn't want to make the occupational therapy role redundant, but we didn't want to make.
Can I just jump in there as well? I'll just say, Jess and I delivered a twilight training session to the staff at the school, and afterwards we gave out a questionnaire which the staff filled out for us, and they reported, as we kind of said in the presentation, a lot of improved confidence, and they actually felt more equipped to address the children's needs themselves, and rather than referring on to us then. So there was a wider impact in that sense. And part of the training, they also updated the children's sensory profiles, and so we had a before and after picture of how the staff had changed them based on the training. So it was really clear, you could see the difference that the training had made, and yeah, then it impacted the number of referrals that we had as well.
Yeah, what Anya said. And yeah, so we found this more effective, the universal approach, and it was also really useful in preparation for our exit plan, because we were only there for a number of weeks. And we measured this, we looked at some standardised outcome measures, but because our focus was on empowering the staff, which became one of our main goals, it was difficult to measure that with a standardised outcome measure, as we couldn't find one that really existed that approach. So to measure this, we used staff feedback about their confidence in meeting the children's needs, and we also used observation in the classroom with the children. So that was our main kind of outcome measure in this circumstance. So we did think about creating our own outcome measure, but with time constraints. So it was only a 12-week placement. We didn't find this possible. So yeah, I don't know if you want to jump in, Anya.
No. Okay, that's lovely. And again, another question for the school-based group. So Danielle is asking, occupational therapy is present and is already very well embedded within the American school system. She was wondering if that influenced the way in which you worked or offered support.
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer that question. On my placement, which was completed before Jess and Anya's, we did look at a wide range of evidence in order to guide our practice. However, it was more that because we were in such a specialist, an autism base within a mainstream school, it was such a niche sort of service, we wanted to use RCOT policy and evidence to almost have the freedom to create our own structure and process, and how we felt with limited knowledge of paediatric support within schools anyway, we just wanted to kind of pick something and run with it. So we created our own assessment tools. Specifically, I know that we did a dressing group, and being in the school environment, you can't directly observe children dressing, which you can in paediatric services. Therefore, we had to look at different indicators on the success of dressing, such as presentability of the clothes, time spent changing, and staff support during the changing process, which we then used as our outcome measure. So we almost, even though there were structures of OT used in America and other countries, we decided that actually we wanted to do a proper, real role emergent placement, in the sense of like, there's nothing there, let's just pick something and run with it. And we felt that through discussion with the community occupational therapists in the Serenity Children's Centre that we were coming from, that actually we were almost kind of using what they were using as their care aims and model, but running with something completely different that they wouldn't necessarily have thought of. which we felt, you know, personally as students, there was an added value there in designing a service, trialing it, and then evaluating it at the end, which we wouldn't have done had we taken a model of American practice and then put that into our own practice.
Lovely, thank you, Emma. So thank you to the three groups of presenters for really comprehensive answers to some really interesting questions. So thank you, everybody. I think it's time for a break. Is that right, Catherine?
It is, yes. Thank you very much, everyone. So if we have a short comfort break and reconvene at 20 past, if that's okay with everyone, that's great. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody, and without any further ado, we'll move straight on to the next presentation, which is by Sam Baker.
That's great. Thank you very much, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. So my name's Sam. I'm a part-time lecturer practitioner at Wrexham Glyndŵr University, and I'm here to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour into a systematic review that I conducted as part of my master's study. I also work as a forensic specialist for North West Boroughs Healthcare NHS Trust, and have previously worked as a forensic specialist working with people who commit stalking offences in Hampshire. So that's my background. So if we go to the next slide, please, Catherine, thank you. So just very briefly, before I get stuck into the meat of this presentation, just a quick disclaimer that I will be briefly talking about stalking and some of the behaviours that entails, which might be a little bit difficult for some people to hear, especially given some of the current news that we've had going on in the last couple of weeks. If there is anyone that finds the topic difficult and wants to be signposted to support agencies after the presentation, please feel free to contact the organisers of this conference today, and I'll be more than happy to signpost anyone that has any concerns or wants a little bit of advice. Now, this systematic review was born out of some work that I did alongside the police and probation in Hampshire as part of a first of its kind multi-agency project working with stalking perpetrators. So that's where this is developed from. So I'm going to briefly take you through what stalking is, and then we're going to have a look at the findings of my systematic review. So stalking as a criminal offence is very widely misunderstood. There's lots of things that people don't quite understand about stalking, what it is and what it isn't. But the definitions for stalking talk about a pattern of fixated or obsessive behaviour, which is repeated, persistent, intrusive, and causes fear of violence or engenders alarm and distress in the victims of stalking. Okay, it can be really diverse in how it presents itself. It can take a presentation over lots of years, or it can be a short period of time. The longest documented episode of stalking behaviour in the research is 44 years of consistent and persistent stalking behaviour against individuals. So you can imagine the impact that has on people. Stalking consists of different behaviours, so it could be communications, contacts, it could be anything that is intruding upon someone else's life. And fundamentally, it's the imposition of a relationship that is unwanted on the reciprocal end. Okay, so it's a relationship that the victim doesn't want, whether it's driven by infatuation, whether it's driven by feelings of revenge, or whether it's driven by delusion. It's an imposition of a relationship that the receiving party does not want to be a part of. If we could have the next slide, please, then, Catherine. Thank you. So I've got a few statistics here for you, just to give you a bit of a background as to the scope of stalking and the impact it can have. So 1 in 5 women and 1 in 10 men will be stalked in their lifetime. So you can think about how prevalent that actually is in the community. Next slide, please, Catherine. But the most concerning thing is, and this statistic is now almost 6 years old, however, it is still relevant and it hasn't really changed since 2015. But only 1% of stalking cases and 16% of harassment cases recorded by police have resulted in a charge and prosecution. Okay, and that's because of a lack of understanding generally, and it's also because evidence is really hard to capture for stalking. And in terms of actually understanding why people engage in this and having strategies to stop people from stalking in the future, we're still very much in the early stages of those being developed. We can have the next slide, please, Catherine. Okay, so this is another reason why stalking offences are so poorly pursued in the courts, is because quite often victims won't tend to report to the police that they've got an issue with somebody stalking them until about the 100th incident. Now, that could be the 100th time they've turned up at work. It could be the 100th phone call they've had. It could be the 100th letter. Okay, it could be the 100th time they've been accosted in the street. But that leads to 99 other incidents having not been evidenced and the police not being able to pursue any sort of lines of inquiry into those, which makes it really difficult. And that's because general public also have a real poor lack of understanding as to what stalking is, and people are very scared as well. So you can see the intrusion it has on people's lives through these statistics. And we've got one more for you. If you could just go on to the next slide, Catherine, please. And this highlights the severity of stalking. So this is quite an old study now, but it very much is still applicable to criminal behaviour patterns at the moment. But the Metropolitan Police found that almost half of the victims of a domestic homicide had also been previously stalked. So stalking is also a precursor to very serious crimes and can fundamentally lead to other people's deaths. So it is a very serious offence and something that really does need further intervention and awareness being made of it. Next slide, please, then, Catherine. So the aim of my systematic review as part of my master's study was to identify the role that occupational therapy might have in working with stalking perpetrators and trying to reduce these reoffending rates. And as part of that, it involved exploring the literature to try and find out if there was an occupational perspective that could provide an extra viewpoint on stalking, provide an additional lens to view how people become engaged in these behaviours and how these behaviours become retained over time. So I'm going to take you through some of the key components that I pulled out from the literature. So we go to the next slide, please, Catherine. So the first thing to think about is that traditionally when we think of occupations or the things that people do, we link occupation with improving well-being and improving health and well-being of people. So we look at these things that people do on a daily basis as the practical and purposeful activities that people engage in, and how occupation gives people a sense of identity. It could be those day-to-day tasks that we do. And you look at some of those traditional definitions that are on the screen, and they're often talking about cultural values, providing structure for people, and meeting human needs of self-care, enjoyment, participation. Now, these are the traditional views of occupation, but we all understand that there are things that people do that perhaps we don't understand as well, but also will cause themselves or other people harm. And actually having a greater understanding of those occupations makes us a more client-centered profession as a whole. And that is the argument of Rebecca Twinley, who came up with the concept of the dark side of occupation. You can go on to the next slide, Catherine. So the dark side of occupation was a key underpinning component of my systematic review. And the concept behind the dark side of occupation isn't about Sith Lords or Darth Vader, but it is about occupations that people engage in that are unexplored, unexplained, and may cause harm or distress to themselves or others. And these occupations challenge the long-standing belief that engaging in occupation is correlated with improving health and well-being. Okay. And there is another analogy that we can use to look at the dark side of occupation, which is on my next slide. And this is about the dark side of the moon. So what we're not doing with the dark side of occupation is we're not making a moral judgment about other people's engagements in occupation or labeling the things that people do as bad or dark. It's more about trying to have a greater understanding as to why people are doing it. Because if we can get a greater understanding as to why people are engaging in these occupations, we have a much better chance of improving their lives and reducing reoffending rates. Okay, so that's a key theory behind the systematic review. So in terms of the key topics that I've pulled out from the literature, if we go on to the next slide, these are the main occupational needs that I found in the literature. Okay, so we've talked briefly about the dark side of occupation and its links to stalking. So the argument is that stalking is an example of the dark side of occupation, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more depth with some of these specific needs in a moment. But these are the key factors that I've pulled out from the literature. So you've got emotional regulation, social ability, balanced lifestyle, self-esteem, identity and role performance, and social isolation. So I'm going to go through a couple of the main ones in a little bit more depth in the next slide. So the first one I'm going to talk about is social ability. Okay, so Mackenzie et al. 2010, who are really high-profile researchers into the area of stalking, they highlighted that perpetrators of stalking have a much lower verbal IQ than a sample of non-stalkers. So this suggests that individuals who engage in some of these behaviours have difficulties expressing themselves, have lower emotional intelligence, and have a real difficulty building healthy relationships. And sometimes born out of that can be feelings of anger, jealousy, a desire for revenge if a relationship breaks down. Okay, and this is a reason why legal sanctions alone are not particularly effective at reducing reoffending, because they're not changing any of these social skill deficits that individuals have. So whilst they may provide some sort of sanction for a behaviour that someone's engaged in, it's not going to reduce the chances of them reoffending again in the future, because those skill sets haven't changed. That person still finds it really difficult to socialize or to express their own needs. Now, more recent research by Thompson has also looked at stalking and dynamic risk factors, and they found that poor communication skills, okay, positively correlated with an increased risk of violence in a stalking situation. So there's a positive correlation there between an inability to express themselves in a social capacity and the increased risk for violence, increases the risk on victims. So quite often stalking behaviours can be driven by desire for love, friendship and kinship, but it might be that the individual doesn't have the social skills to seek out love in an appropriate manner. So social ability is a real key occupational need of stalking perpetrators in terms of trying to re-engage with the community. Now, another one is balanced lifestyle, which is on the next slide. So across all of the literature, it's identified that people that engage in stalking make quite often careless lifestyle choices when they're trying to pursue the victim they're going after for whatever motivation that they're exploring. This means that they negate other areas in their lives. Okay, so they may break off other relationships with family or friends. They may lose vocations that they have. They won't engage in their hobbies, and they'll likely have disrupted sleep. They'll take greater risks in terms of their own personal well-being and the well-being of others. And this breakdown of protective factors then increases the intensity of the need to stalk and harass the person they're going after. Okay, because it becomes all encompassing. It becomes their sole occupation, their sole purpose. And you can see how that gradually over time becomes the singular meaning for that person. Okay, it becomes the one occupation that means something to them, and it's the thing that gets them up in the morning once all the other things have been lost over a period of time. And again, Thompson had a look at this in research last year that identified that sort of having a poor work-life balance, a lack of employment and a lack of stable relationships increased the risk of persistence of stalking, but also increased the risk of violence as well. So you can see how people become socially isolated, and then the fixation on that individual becomes much more heightened because of a lack of protective factors. So that's balanced lifestyle. Now, contributing to that as well is self-esteem. Now, stalking perpetrators whose relationships have broken down romantically, so perhaps a marriage has broken down, or a partner, husband, wife, boyfriend or girlfriend, if there's a romantic connection, there's a much higher chance that that perpetrator will commit a violent offence, but may also commit a violence offence in the public as well to try and get to the victim. And there is also the higher risk of suicide amongst stalking perpetrators from a romantic relationship background. Now, the risk of offenders continuing in behaviour, not just stalking offenders, but offenders in general, is increased with lower levels of self-esteem. And this is often linked to stigma that comes with offending histories, or stigma for behaviour that they may have done as part of a relationship. So if there is a real lack of protective factors there, low self-worth, low self-esteem, the likelihood of recurrence of stalking behaviour, so something starting again after it's stopped, or persistence, which is continued over time, is much higher amongst the stalking perpetrator group. And this brings me on to the last element that I've pulled out from the literature, and that's identity. Now, as I've briefly talked about, an individual's identity becomes intertwined with this stalking behaviour, and especially in the context of a rejected typology. And a rejected typology of stalking is a romantic relationship that has broken down, and the perpetrator themselves are either looking to re-engage in that relationship or seek revenge for its breakdown. And stalking happens in this context because of the desire to keep that relationship alive. So for that person, the relationship might be everything that they've ever had and ever wanted. So if they identify, and I'm going to use a male perpetrator as an example here, but if they identify as a father, or if they identify as a husband, and if they lose all of that as part of that relationship breakdown, they will do everything that they can to get it back. And by stalking the victim, okay, this keeps that identity alive for them. If they keep making contacts, no matter how many times they're told not to, no matter how many legal sanctions are placed upon them, if they keep making that contact, they haven't lost that role. Okay, they haven't lost that identity in the community, and that keeps their motivation levels high, because without that identity, they haven't got anything else. Okay, so identity and role is a key element when working with stalking perpetrators. Now, if we can go on to the next slide. So I've briefly talked about the dark side of occupation. So it is argued within my systematic review that stalking is an example of the dark side of occupation, where people engage in stalking and it is persisted over time because it provides meaning, purpose, and a function for them. Now, it may be causing them harm, it will be causing the victim significant harm, but it's still providing them a meaning and purpose, okay, which are key components of occupation. Now, why is this important? So just to sort of finish off my presentation and give you the bit of the background as the systematic review's importance. I get asked quite a lot why I didn't focus on victim experience and why in my previous role I wasn't working with victims. And the reason is there are some really great services that work in providing victim support. However, if we don't truly understand why people are engaging in stalking behaviour, we aren't going to be able to prevent or reduce future victims. Okay, so if we just focused on victim support, it would be like papering over the cracks. But if we can understand why people are engaging in stalking, we've got a much improved awareness, much improved opportunity for risk management and intervention, and we can have improved outcomes, which in turn protects victims longer term. Okay, so my systematic review argues that stalking is a meaningful occupation, and there is a real role for occupational therapists in building up the protective factors for people that engage in stalking, which will in turn reduce the likelihood of future stalking. So in terms of what's next, final slide here. So that's the argument for my systematic review. Now, in terms of publication, I'm currently working with a psychologist colleague from the HMP Nottingham on an 8-part stalking series to present and publish this formally within articles. And there are some more stalking intervention projects that are happening throughout the United Kingdom as a result of Home Office funding. But there is greater evidence needed in terms of intervention that's effective. And I think occupational therapy plays a key role in that development over time. So thank you for listening to me this morning. I look forward to answering any questions in the Q&A.
Okay, so my name's Janine Evans. I'm an occupational therapist at the Welsh Centre for Burns and Plastic Surgery in Morrison Hospital in Swansea, where I've been for the last 20 years. And I'll be joined in this presentation today by Matt Roberts, who's an OT student at Cardiff University. And we're going to be telling you about the evaluation of our occupational therapy-led online burn prevention sessions with older adults in community group settings. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction, burn injury is an important part of morbidity and mortality amongst older adults. They're considered to be the most devastating of all injuries, and the financial cost of treating them within the NHS is really significant. Treatment of a major burn costs in excess of about £90,000, and the personal cost is obviously immeasurable. By 2039, around 1 in 4 people in the UK is projected to be aged 65 or over. So given this prediction of an increasingly ageing society, both the number of older adults treated for a burn injury and the costs associated with this are likely to rise. Due to the changes in physical ability, vision, perception and cognition associated with advancing age, compounded by the side effects of the medications often required to treat these, older adults are at a high risk of sustaining a burn injury, and they also experience more life-threatening burn injuries than any other age group. They also remain in hospital for longer, and as they are more likely to experience long-term physical impairment, reductions in quality of life and loss of independence following a burn injury, this places a significant financial burden on community and social services. Burn injuries in older adults most commonly occur at home during activities of daily living, such as cooking and bathing. Therefore, OTs are well placed to address the agenda of preventing burn injuries in the home. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of background to this particular project, back in 2018, I started delivering some burn prevention education sessions to OTs working with older adults in health and social care settings across South Wales. These were evaluated with pre and post session questionnaires, and we identified that after the sessions there'd been an increase in burn prevention knowledge and intention to change practice to incorporate burn prevention advice into the routine OT practice. However, I was aware that many older adults aren't receiving formal OT in health and social care settings, and that they would also benefit from this burn prevention advice. I felt that by making small changes to the teaching and evaluation materials I'd already designed, the programme could be delivered to older adults attending groups in the community, but not necessarily accessing health and social care OT services. However, as I'm sure you're all experienced in similar situations, clinical and leadership responsibilities in work mean that I didn't have enough time to commit to this, unfortunately. But in Swansea Bay University Health Board, we are very, very fortunate to have Laura Ingham as our Research and Development Lead OT, who also works at the OT school in Cardiff Uni. And she suggested that an OT student could possibly assist with this project. So she introduced me to Dr. Catherine Purcell, and the three of us got together to work on planning the project. We submitted an application to the British Burn Association for a research into methods of preventing burn injuries in the home grant back in January of last year. But unfortunately, before it could be considered by the executive board, obviously COVID happened and the whole world was plunged into chaos. So it was put on the back burner for a little while. Then in July, I had a surprise email from the British Burn Association to say that they'd accepted or approved the grant application, and we were able to proceed with the work. So after a period of mild panic, wondering how on earth we were going to deliver these sessions to community groups that were no longer running because of the COVID restrictions, we made some minor amendments to the proposal and sent it back to the BBA, and they were happy for us to proceed with running groups in online sessions. So we had a very, very quick turnover recruitment drive with the university, and we were very fortunate to appoint Matt into the post as a paid project over the summer. So I'll just hand over to Matt now so he can tell you a little bit. If I go through the aims and objectives quickly, we wanted to set up an educational programme highlighting the risks within the home environment for older adults and try and encourage them to change their behaviour. We were going to use the pre and post programme questionnaires to evaluate the sessions to determine whether they'd been useful in improving burn injury prevention knowledge. And we wanted to use this as preliminary evidence to support and inform a larger scale research project. So over to Matt now, who can give you a little bit of information about how we went about it.
Hello everyone, thank you for that, Janine. If you wouldn't mind just clicking the first point. So I was involved in the project for about 8 weeks, and the first job I had to do was undertake a scoping exercise to see what literature was out there specifically for older adults, see what we could learn from other sources of information. And our conclusions were that older adults weren't actually very well represented in the research. There'd been lots of targeted burn prevention education at children in order to minimise the risks to this demographic, but older adults, despite the risks, hadn't really been very well represented in research. So from there, we revised the existing presentation and questionnaires that Janine had devised for our previous sessions, with the main aim of simplifying them and making them appropriate for the formats of the workshops that we were presenting in, and also, for the service users we were aiming to target. So really clear messaging was important. We also revised the existing evaluation tools in order to make them accessible. And like Janine says, we used a pre and post presentation questionnaire to evaluate the knowledge acquisition that people had gained. So we had 10 questions that were identical before and after, and the results will be on the next slide. We also, in partnership with Cardiff Uni, designed an infographic which had 5 top tips on preventing burn injuries for older adults, and it was designed so that participants could take it home, and it had a checklist so you could tick off the 5 key things you could do to keep yourself safe. We also liaised with community group leaders. Like Janine said, it was initially, the plan initially was to deliver these sessions in person within community centres and local hubs, but that was obviously not possible. So I was involved in contacting lots of local area coordinators and third sector organisations to see if any had changed their practices as a result of the pandemic and were undertaking online events. and we were fortunate enough to ultimately conduct 3 webinars with Men's Sheds Cymru, the Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research, and the Rhondda 50+ Forum. So the results, we had 50 attendees at these presentations. The demographic breakdown is visible on these graphs here, and we had 25 people fill in our pre-presentation questionnaire and 14 our post-presentation. As the results are here on the left, and we were really pleased to see over a 20% increase in correct responses. So that really suggests that people responded well to our data, although we didn't get as many questionnaires returned as we'd hoped to. And the results indicated that 100% of those who answered the questionnaire found the webinar relevant to their interests. 100% also strongly agreed or agreed that it increased their understanding of the topic discussed. And 100% found the format to be appropriate for the subject, which, you know, we really took a lot of effort to make sure it was appropriate, and we had a small focus group session to trial it to make sure it was suitable for older adult service users. And finally, 100% also strongly agreed that the webinar provided useful and helpful ideas. So we also were lucky enough to have a summary report sent to us by the Centre of Ageing and Dementia Research, and some of this data is from that report. Next slide, please. We also, were lucky enough to capture some qualitative feedback. We were commended on our clear explanations and the advice provided. We encourage service users to reevaluate and adapt their own living space and habits. So it was very much about what people could do to keep themselves safe, as well as reinforcing the important message of cool, call and cover, which lots of service users hadn't actually heard before. You know, we come across stop, drop and roll, but that was a really important learning point for many participants. And we were also complimented on the advice that we were given and the best actions to take in an emergency. So we wanted it to have that dual function of prevention and what to do in an emergency situation. I will hand back to Janine to talk you through the conclusions.
Thank you, Matt. So OTs can contribute to burn prevention in older adults through adaptation of the home environment and modification of burn risk behaviours. There's scope for burn injury prevention to be included routinely into OT practice, whether that be through your usual interventions within hospital or the home environment, but also teaching to community groups locally to you in your regions. Ultimately, there is a big prevention agenda at the moment, and AHPs and especially OTs are being encouraged, as you've heard from some of the talks today, to involve themselves in public health and prevention education. And by doing this with burns, OTs could significantly contribute to a reduction in the number of burn injuries being sustained by older adults within their home environments during activities of daily living. Thank you for listening. We look forward to any questions.
Hi everyone. It's a pleasure to present today and really showcase the work that's being done to bridge the gap between research and practice. My name's Anthony Jones, and I'm an occupational therapist working with the Macmillan Therapy team in Swansea Bay, UHB. I'm joined today by Zadie, Lorraine and Jess, who took part in the research internship guided by Catherine Purcell and her colleagues in helping us as a service look towards the future. Next slide, please. This isn't the first time that we've made use of the internship project. As a team and in the past, we found it really beneficial. It's allowed us to be guided by what's out there in the evidence rather than being pressured by the organisation or even anecdotal evidence. Previously, as a team, we were looking at really general questions around interventions which support people being affected by head and neck cancer in particular. And this project at the time was really beneficial as it informed our practice going forward. As a result of the major changes happening with COVID, our services needed to find a way to roll with the punches. And so, same again, we came knocking at the door to Cardiff Uni for some support, and this then led to the current project at hand. Next slide, please. So a bit of background about who we are. We're a therapy team made up of OTs and physiotherapists and therapy technicians who, prior to the pandemic, covered 2 services. An inpatient service based on Ward 12 in Swansea Singleton Hospital, and this has remained unchanged, and an outpatient service, which was the context for this project being carried out in. Our outpatient service worked with any person affected by cancer at any stage of their diagnosis or recovery. People could self-refer in, or referrals would be received from the wider MDT. We offered support and advice for people to work towards their goals, which we would set together in a really client-centered way. And often, in order to work towards these goals, people would attend one of our 3 classes, such as Tai Chi, hydrotherapy or circuits, or even do one-to-one sessions on things like fatigue management or anxiety management over a period of 12 weeks. It's a service that we as a team are extremely proud of. And I even had the honour this time last year of being able to support a man walk his daughter down the aisle for her wedding. But then COVID happened, and the service as a result had to stop. The pause allowed us as a team to press reset and reflect on the service as a whole. It led us to think really deeply about what makes a cancer specialist, what makes specialist special. And it led us to think, were we seeing the appropriate patients? And echoing the words of the prudent healthcare principles, those patients who needed the support most. It made us think whether we could better engage with these people through other community services which already existed, so that we could prioritise those with the greatest health need. It therefore led us to form a bedrock, and it's a bedrock which we felt needed to be based on the evidence that was out there. Next slide, please. This then led us to go to Cardiff University with the question, what do people affected by cancer require from an occupation-based approach whilst implementing prudent healthcare principles? And this is the process that the interns took. So I'll hand you over to the team. Next slide, please.
Okay, so Anthony provided us with the research question. He kindly explained it with a presentation. And then together with PhD students Amy Plant and Sarah Pocknor, thank you both ladies, we second year occupational therapy students drew up an initial search parameters derived from 4 concepts. If you could show the next slide, please. The 4 concepts were intervention, occupation-based approach, prudent healthcare principles, and cancer. It should be on the next slide, the table. Using these terms to search both Senile and Medline databases, we returned around 200 results, which was reduced to 22 journals when limited to those with full text available, published in the last 10 years. From those 22 journals, 15 were selected as being relevant to the research question. Over to you, Zadie.
So here we have an example of some of the journals that the team worked on. So for example, process evaluation of the cancer home life intervention, what can we learn from it for the future intervention studies, or self-management intervention for cancer survivors, a systematic review. And this couldn't be possible without all of the students from second year of pre-registration. So next slide, please. Lorraine?
So I looked at a literature review by Pizzi and Briggs regarding hospice care. According to the article, assessment should have a health promotion focus. Long and short-term goals should be negotiated which aim to optimise physical function and enhance quality of life in order to facilitate engagement in meaningful occupations. And while some of the suggested interventions are specialised one-to-one, There are many interventions which serve to optimise comfort, endurance and physical function, as well as those which facilitate meaning that could be delivered at the universal level of the care aims model. These include exercise and stretching, energy conservation techniques, reminiscence work, support groups and upskilling the village through problem solving and health education for patients and their carers. Over to you, Zadie.
Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So the journal that I work on is called Exploring the Role of Occupational Therapy in Caring for Cancer Survivors in Australia, a cross-sectional study by Nicole Buckland and Lynette Mackenzie. So the aim of this journal was to explore the perception of occupational therapists about what constitutes the best occupational therapy practice and identify the perceived barriers to implementing the best practice for cancer survivorship. The paper brings areas of cancer survivorship where occupational therapists believe that patients are most likely to benefit from. The participants identified issues addressed by the occupational therapists, such as equipment need, 94%, fatigue and energy conservation, pressure area intervention and management, returning to meaningful occupations, including leisure, lifestyle adjustments, lymphedema, education, stress management, cognitive changes, and pain. It has also been highlighted in the journal that there is a lack of funding for occupational therapy by health professionals and consumers were identified as key barriers to the survivorship care. As mentioned, this paper is relevant to the research question. However, it would be interesting to find out the perspective of the cancer patients rather than the occupational therapist. Further research is needed on the role and practice of occupational therapy with cancer survivorship, and this is highlighted as well by this paper. Jess?
Hi everyone. So the paper that I looked at looked into an 8-week cancer and nutrition programme and to see if this had an effect on symptoms such as functional complications, loss of appetite and fatigue. It was a pilot study and the patients were diagnosed with gastroesophageal cancer. 22 patients it was multidisciplinary input, so the team consisted of physicians, oncology nurses, psychologists, social workers, physiotherapists and occupational therapists. The OTs involved in this programme assessed the patient's ability to carry out ADLs such as washing, dressing, preparing meals, working, driving and performing leisure activities. 22 patients completed the programme of an original 53. It's quite an intense programme and it required the patients to be physically and mentally well enough to engage on a regular basis. I also acknowledge that this is a small sample size and further research is needed. But upon completion of the programme, there were improvements noted in appetite, strength, nervousness, pain, depression, enjoyment of life, general activity, usual fatigue and levels of distress. The patients were assessed before commencing the programme using assessments such as the brief fatigue inventory, distress thermometer and Edmonton symptom assessment scale, and then they were assessed post intervention. So the Cancer Nutrition and Rehabilitation Programme, hopes to empower patients to take control and enable them to improve their own quality of life. It also involved educating the patients' families on the importance of appropriate nutrition, which could contribute to the sustainability of the intervention and is also in line with the care aims framework. The CNR could be used as an effective intervention for other types of cancer. It's multidimensional, holistic treatment approach that emphasises the patient as an individual. And the CNR appears to be a relevant and appropriate intervention that could be incorporated into most, if not all, cancer treatment programmes. As on the face of it, it doesn't seem to have an occupational focus. However, appropriate nutrition was enabling participation in occupation. Next slide, please. So the learning outcomes. So this is the second OT clinic that I've participated in. So we got to meet the PhD students that helped us beyond the research internship with other areas of our studies.
They offered advice, support on occasion, so thanks to them. We got insight into how research can actually be applied to practice and used in clinical settings, and this can sometimes feel very distant for us as students. So yeah, it was great to see that. It was a networking opportunity, so we got to meet Anthony and learn about his team. We got to see evidence-based practice in action, and again, this can feel like just a notion sometimes. We're taught of its importance, but the internship has given us a chance to see how it works in a way that makes it seem less scary. We got knowledge about Macmillan and Anthony and his team and the amazing work they do. And we also got an insight into prudent healthcare, care aims, frameworks and policies that we sort of touch on in university. But yeah, we actually get to see how this is going to guide us as practitioners in the future. That's me. There you go.
So as mentioned already, the evidence really forms a backdrop for how we as a team go forward and bridges this gap that's already been mentioned between research and practice. Speaking as a clinician, the internship has been a lifeline. Simply put, we haven't had the capacity to go through the same lengths as the students have in forming this detailed analysis of what the literature identifies. As many of you can relate, our normal roles went out the window pretty much as soon as the pandemic struck. And it's been a time of support in the wider department, our wider hospital colleagues, and doing what we could in a crisis to ensure that our communities were being best supported. And do you know what? Despite the chaos and the devastation and the loss, it's been a really positive experience. Looking back, we've achieved so much as an outpatient service. We still have great relationships with our patients who continue to remain in touch, and even continue to have other AHP colleagues wanting to support us build our case to re-establish the service. But on reflection, it's time to shake things up a bit. We're human, and we get quite attached. Like anything you feel comfortable with, you have a bit of a yearning of wanting things to go back to how they used to be. However, we're looking forward, and we're being objective about this and thinking about the bigger picture. And we're using this evidence base in part to step in that direction. Some of the key themes that really stood out for us as a team from the internship project included how important it was for all people to access the generic advice and information that was out there, which would hopefully prevent people getting into a point of crisis. And it's something we often hear from people affected by cancer, where they have concerns about whether they can still carry out physical activity, or whether they become first diagnosed, is it safe to do so? You know, the evidence that's out there suggests the opposite. And so we need to be thinking about this wider audience and making messages like physical activity promotion heard. Another theme which really stood out for us was the importance of a therapeutic relationship. We often meet people where they feel that they're most vulnerable, whether it's due to a new diagnosis, disease progression, or change in function. And I truly feel blessed to be able to form therapeutic relationships and enable people, mimicking the words of Arcot, live life to the full in these situations. And as a team, this is something that we've thought about in the context of what makes a specialist. Our treatments are no different to other OT settings, nor does the OT process change. What is different, however, is this unique bond that we form, which helps guide people to achieve what happens to them and what matters to them. The difficulty is translating these themes now into practice, and this is where the virtual working side of things really comes in. We're beginning to translate various aspects of the OT role into a virtual format, which is becoming more and more like everyday practice, but there does still feel like there's a bit of loss, a loss of connection, of touch, those real human aspects which allow relationships to form. And that's just going to be something we'll have to become inventive with over the next, couple of years or months. In terms of developments, the health board is still feeling the pressures of the pandemic, and there's still a lot of cross covering. And so this project is still a work in progress. We have, however, begun developing universal resources in a computerized and user-friendly format to ensure that all people get the information they need to make informed decisions to prevent them hitting crisis. The kind of topics covered have been on the role of physical activity, fatigue, and anxiety management. And these are all due to go live on the OT webpage in the coming weeks. In addition to this, we're also aware of the benefits of our groups. And so we're soon to be filming our technicians carrying out sessions like Tai Chi so that people can complete this in their own time. So hopefully you've been able to see that the research internship has been very beneficial for our team and our patients. It's proved opportunity to form this bridge between practice and research and allows us to plan ahead with the evidence base as our backdrop. I'd just like to say thank you again to Catherine, her colleagues, and all of the interns that supported us with this. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for three more excellent presentations that just serve to demonstrate the breadth and scope of projects that are going on across Wales. So I have some questions here that I'm gonna publish. Let me just do that. So the first question is to do with Sam's presentation. So the first question asks from Kirsty, where is the best place for this type of intervention, i.e. prison or when on probation? So Sam, I don't know if you're able to address that.
Yeah, certainly can do my best. The best place for these interventions is as early as possible, really. So it does depend on the individual. We conducted interventions both in prison and whilst people are on probation, and it's likely that the intervention that people would need would be moderate to long term. So ideally, if you had somebody placed in a prison setting, you'd want to follow them out into the community to continue that work to prevent any future reoffending. Similarly, there might be people in a hospital setting or open to community mental health teams that need specific support with some of this type of intervention. But the key message is that the earlier the intervention, the better, because then it minimises the risk to the victim, it minimises the impact to victims and families, but it also will have a much better chance of enacting effective behaviour change as early as possible. That's the answer to that.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Sam. Don't go anywhere because the next couple of questions are for you as well. So one here from Rob who asks, so thanks you for a great presentation, and then asks about whether or not you think it should be part of the curricula for OT registration courses going forward.
I am very biased, so this is obviously my opinion, but yes, I believe so. It is still a very new concept. The concept was formed only towards the end of 2012 and 2013, so the literature and evidence base remains really sparse in terms of exploring it in different settings and applying it in different ways. The first textbook has been released, illuminating the dark side of occupation, but there is plenty of scope for further research to sort of apply it. But I think it's a really important concept, and it helps us to look at all of the occupations that people do, including the ones that might make us as practitioners feel uncomfortable a little bit as well. So I personally do think so. However, there is still lots of research that's needed to stretch it out a little bit.
Great, thank you very much, Sam. And another question for you whilst we have you. Do you think that there are links from stalking to addictions, e.g. alcohol?
That's quite an interesting question. You could definitely look at some patterns of stalking behaviour as an addictive type behaviour, and there definitely are transferable components when you're looking at addictions to substances and perhaps stalking behaviours in terms of fixation, in terms of the all-encompassing nature, in terms of actually people arranging everything else in their life to fit around perhaps either an addiction or stalking. So there definitely are parallels, certainly, and there's an interesting chapter that talks about substance misuse and trying to understand that from a dark side of occupation perspective in the textbook as well. So I think there definitely are some similarities between stalking and addictions when you look at human behaviour, for sure.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Sam. So the next question is for Janine and or Matt. So the question is whether or not you considered involving the fire service in either producing your intervention or presentation content or to access future potential audiences.
Yeah, we've got really good links with our community partnership officers in the fire and rescue service, and we've been doing joint events with them for a number of years now. The difficulty is that burns aren't just caused by fire and flame. So the fire and rescue services already provide a really good fire prevention programme with anybody within their home environment, not just older adults, but actually with older adults, the main cause of burn injuries is scalds. Flame is a close second, followed by contact burns. So unfortunately, the prevention of scalds and contact burns aren't things that are commonly addressed by the fire and rescue services, hence us trying to concentrate on those in the prevention education that I deliver. We've also got some really good links with the occupational therapist that works as part of the fire and rescue service in Wales. He's on secondment there at the moment, and again we've done lots of joint work in there, and I'm hoping to develop an online package specifically for fire and rescue services personnel to teach them about the dangers of scald and contact burn injuries as well, to try and encourage them to incorporate those into the really good flame and fire prevention programs that they offer already. But I wouldn't say there's resistance, it's just a bit more difficult to get anything over and above fire safety across to the fire and rescue services. So a lot of partnership working at the moment, and we have already established some really good links, so we'll see what comes of that over the next few months and years.
Thank you, Janine, that's great. Whilst you're there, another question for yourself and or Matt. So Lucy's asking, is the content of your burn prevention webinars available to other health boards to embed within practice?
So prior to COVID, I was going out and delivering these teaching sessions face to face. My job is outreach normally, and we are a regional service, so I was very fortunate that my post allowed me to travel across South Wales to deliver this teaching. But obviously, since COVID and the travel restrictions that are in place, I haven't been going out and doing face-to-face presentations, but I am able to do online presentations obviously now, as today has shown. So if anybody would be interested in me delivering a bespoke presentation online to your service, then please just drop me a line and we can make arrangements for that to happen. I'm really keen to keep pushing this agenda and getting it out there for OTs. It's so simple, it's stuff that we already know, it's common sense, it's really, really easy to embed within our normal practice. And if we just prevent one single major burn injury happening to an older adult, that's potentially saving £90,000 minimum to the NHS. So the more I can share this information, the better. We are also hoping to develop an RCOT workbook. That's something that we're just starting to look into, just to make the resources more readily available, but in a slightly controlled manner, because obviously prevention education needs to change as the advice changes ultimately. So it's not something that we want to publish on YouTube or anything like that specifically at the moment, just in case at some point in the future the advice changes. By keeping it live or by keeping it protected within RCOT website, we can make sure then that the correct information is out there at all times and that people aren't able to access incorrect information or out of date information from old resources that are published online. So I hope that helps. But contact me if you're interested. I'm happy to deliver any sessions online.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Janine. Sam, a couple more questions for you if you don't mind. We should go back up here. One here, are online harassment stalking behaviours taken into account in the wider occupation of stalking? Do people who engage in stalking tend to recognise that they are stalking, or do they not correlate what they're doing with the label of stalking?
So in terms of online stalking behaviour, so anything that's conducted online falls into the unwanted communications bracket of stalking behaviours. So there's three brackets of stalking behaviours. You've got unwanted communications, which is about sending a message from the individual to the victim. You've also then got contacts, which is seeking proximity to the victim. And then you've got a very broad third category, which is anything else that fits into that pattern. So online behaviour certainly comes into the communications element when considering a pattern of stalking behaviour over time. Now, in terms of the people who are engaging in it, it's rare that they will initially acknowledge their behaviours consist of a pattern of stalking behaviour. Often there is a sense of entitlement towards whoever the victim might be because of the motivation that's underpinning the behaviour. So if it's a romantic pursuit of somebody, they'll feel entitled to engage in some of the behaviours that they're doing, and they won't understand the impact that it's having on the victim. So quite a lot of the work sometimes is about trying to find out what those motivations are, and trying to work on them understanding the impact they're having on a wider basis. So it is quite rare for people to be able to identify their behaviours with the label of stalking. That can be quite a barrier to working with people sometimes.
That's great, thanks, Sam. And there's a question here about how working in this field impacts on you. So the question is from Becky, and she asks, do you have to be thick-skinned to work with people who commit dark occupations? Does it affect you?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'm not sure about thick-skinned, but you need to be able to work in a non-judgmental manner with people that have committed very serious offences. So I have worked with people that have committed the most serious offences that you could possibly think of, and I have worked with people that have committed with it pretty much every offence that you can think of. So there has to be an element of being able to have a level of acceptance in terms of acknowledging what they've done, but still working with them objectively as an individual. It does affect you, certainly. There are certain cases that I was a part of that were really hard to listen to specific details on, and you do have to make sure that if you're working with people that are engaging in some of these behaviours, that you have a well-structured reflective practice opportunity to be able to talk about some of those emotions, that you are open in terms of supervision, because there might be people that are really difficult to work with sometimes, and if there's any sense of judgment when you're working with someone, or something that makes you feel really uncomfortable, it's about making sure that you as a practitioner are really reflective about your work going forwards. And for me, working in this area, it was really, I could really see the impact we were having on trying to protect victims and keep people safe. So that fundamentally is what comes down to it. But you do have to have an element of resilience, and make sure that you use reflexive practice to make sure that you get all the support you need, because it inevitably will affect anybody. It doesn't matter how resilient or thick-skinned someone might identify as. It can be really challenging.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks very much, Sam. So the final question that I think we've got time for is for either Zadie, Lorraine, or Jess from the final projects. And the question is from Rob, and he asks, well, firstly, he congratulates you on great work, and then he asks how you think being involved in the research internship has enhanced your learning experience. So why should other students get involved?
Do you want to take it, Zadie?
Well, it's a great opportunity. As Jess mentioned, there are a lot of benefits, and in occupational therapy, research hasn't been a focus, and being involved in research projects as a student shows you that how important research is in terms of the practice and the evidence base out there. As professionals, we need to evidence everything we do, and the research internship, what it does, it helps us with that clinical reasoning and that research skills that are needed as a professional. And I think that it's a great opportunity that Cardiff University provides to everyone that is studying occupational therapy at the moment.
Thanks, Angie. Great answer. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
Yeah, I will add that. I found it really beneficial to be shown how to do a proper literature search to enable me to back up my evidence base properly with current literature. It was really nice to meet the PhD students, to meet Anthony, and just seeing how the research applies to practice, as Zadie's saying, and Jess. It was fascinating actually, because in uni you don't really see that, so that's what I gained from it.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Lorraine. So before I can't see any other questions. Before I hand over to Deb and Liz just to close this event, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our presenters today. I think it's a huge testament to the fantastic scope of work that's going on across Wales, and also to all of our attendees. Thank you very much for attending. Just to let you know that probably not today, but next week I will be sending out a very short evaluation to everyone that attended. It's only 6 questions, and also a certificate of attendance. So thank you very much, and I'm just going to pass over to Deb and.
Hi, well, thank you, Catherine. First of all, really, just to introduce ourselves, I'm Deb Hurl. I'm Head of Health Professions at the School of Healthcare Sciences in Cardiff. But more importantly, I'm proud to be here today as an occupational therapist. And it's been great to see some of the absolutely amazing speeches the presentations that have happened today. I'm going to kick off, but I'm going to hand over then to Liz Cade, who's the Professional Head of Occupational Therapy at Wrexham Glyndŵr. And one of the reasons I'm really proud to stand here today is, although I work for Cardiff University, I also have very close links with Glyndŵr because I worked very closely with Liz and Helen in the setting up of the programme at Glyndŵr, as well as it defining part of my own career development in the development of the tram model with my colleague Sarah Lawson, and she also works at Glyndŵr. So it's great to be able to be here really to do the closing remarks. So firstly, I'd like to thank Catherine and the conference teams from both Cardiff and Glyndŵr for organising this really interesting event today. You might be interested to know that we had an amazing 249 people registered, which includes 24 presenters. And I think that's one of the things that actually shows the benefits of online conference styles. So like a couple of our presenters alluded to, that online does have really great benefits in certain areas. It's not always the best for others, but certainly I think it shows that we can get a much greater attendance through that. The next thing really is to thank all of you, and I know Catherine's just done that, but thank all of you who've presented today. I'm not sure if everyone has noticed on the agenda or whether it's become apparent all the time through the presentations, but all the presentations you've heard today have been as a result of a collaboration, either between HEIs, with students and tutors and practice partners, or with other agencies. And I actually think this is amazing given the challenges that we've all been under during the pandemic. Well done to everybody. I think all the presentations have been of a very high standard, and it's great to see that collaboration occurring. It's particularly good to see it from my perspective, because I remember us sitting down probably a couple of years ago now and formulating our research strategy for occupational therapy. And we agreed that two of the core priorities were to get more collaborative work with our practice partners and other HEIs in Wales, but also to develop the evidence with occupational therapy and to fully engage our students in real world research and evaluation, because we wanted them to feel enthusiastic, confident and understand how to move evidence forward in practice, rather than just seeing research as a module they did in education. So as I say, for me, this event has been particularly significant as it shows this strategy is actually beginning to work. And for me, it's great to see occupational therapy leading this way across the whole of Wales. So again, well done to everybody. Now, before I hand over to Liz, those of you who know me won't be surprised that I would like to finish rounding my element up by reminding you how you can ensure that this event will facilitate your engagement in CPD. So, for those of you who presented today, what you might wish to do is to go back to your projects and reflect on those skills that you've developed through undertaking the work you've done. You might also wish to think about how you might take projects forward to ensure the findings to continue to be applied in practice and to be evaluated. And obviously then the presentations you've done today contribute to the whole package of you engaging in CPD. For those of you who've been attendees, coming to this event is only one thing towards your CPD. But remember, if you're really going to engage in it, what you now need to do is to think about your key learning points from today. You might want to go off and explore one or two areas that you've heard in more depth. Obviously, they're not all going to be relevant to you, but there are lots of learning points that you might have taken away from today. Start applying some of that new knowledge that you've got. And then remember to evaluate, record and share anything that you've done with this work. And it might be you here presenting this time next year. And just remember as well that if you do need support doing something, then please contact staff at either university and I'm sure we'll all be delighted to help. So I'm going to hand over to Liz now, and she's going to talk you through some of what we see as some of the key messages from today.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you. The team, students and the alumni at Glyndŵr who participated and attended would really like to thank you for this opportunity to collaborate and celebrate research across practice and academia, informing and shaping our profession. So thank you to everyone who has presented. It's been highly enjoyable. And as I've been listening, I've captured a few key messages that have leapt out at me. For me, there's a really clear, strong message of optimism, inspiration and recognition of the value of research of and in practice across a breadth of areas. And as a profession, we are really embracing it and recognising its importance. The importance and value of students being involved in active research for their own development, professional identity and practice brings an added value to student education for us all to learn from. Sharing practice and developing services across all of Wales, research opens up opportunity and collaboration to capitalise on, and I encourage you all to do so. The importance of diversity in occupational therapy, thinking of new emerging areas of practice and new ways of working and service delivery accelerated by the experiences of the last year through research. The importance of embracing technology and how it can enhance practice underpinned with research. The value of research of established tools in less established areas where typically used, and to use research to explore these in your own practice, broadening out their use. The value of research to underpinning practice with occupation and occupational science base and theory. And as Deb has said, there is always time for CPD if you capture the learning from everyday practice. And finally, recognising that research is a powerful enabler driving change, that we all have a professional responsibility to embrace and to use research to enhance practice. So thank you to all involved in hosting this fantastic event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And that is the end of our live event today. As I mentioned, I'll be sending out the recording next week, along with a short online kind of questionnaire and a certificate of attendance. So thank you all very, very much for attending, and have a lovely weekend.